Open your eyes, sir. Annie Carter's voice shook as she dropped to her knees on the wet pavement. Sir, can you hear me? Please, look at me. She touched the side of the man's face with trembling fingers and felt how cold his skin was. Too cold. Not the chill of rain alone, but the kind of cold that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside the body. Oh God, she whispered, what's happening to you? The man lay half-curled beside the back door of an upscale restaurant, one hand pressed hard against his chest, the other scraping weakly against the concrete. His suit was dark, expensive, soaked at the shoulder. Rainwater ran along the alley in thin silver lines, carrying bits of paper, cigarette ash, and the smell of garbage from the dumpsters. Now the man's eyes fluttered under the alley light. His lips moved, but no words came out. Sir, stay with me, Annie said. She slid one hand under his cheek and gently tapped his face. Hey, don't close your eyes. Can you tell me your name? He drew in a breath that sounded torn. Annie's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She knew enough first aid to understand this was bad. Very bad. His skin was clammy. His breathing was uneven. His fingers were curled into the fabric over his heart. You're having chest pain? She asked. Is that it? Squeeze my hand if your chest hurts. His hand twitched. Okay, I got you. She reached for her phone, nearly dropped it, caught it against her knee, and dialed 911. While it rang, she kept her other hand on his shoulder, as if her touch alone could hold him to the world. Please pick up, she breathed. Please. A calm female voice came through. 911. What's your emergency? There's a man, Annie said quickly. He collapsed in an alley. I think he's having a heart attack. He's cold, he's sweating, he can barely breathe. What is your location? Annie looked toward the street sign at the mouth of the alley. The rain blurred everything. She blinked hard and forced herself to focus. I'm behind the restaurants off North Wabash, near East Ontario. There's a wine bar, a service alley. I don't know the exact address. That's okay. Stay on the line. Is he conscious? Barely. His eyes keep closing. Is he breathing? Yes, but not right. It's like he can't get air. Do not move him unless he is in immediate danger. Keep him calm. If he stops breathing, I'll walk you through CPR. Annie swallowed. I know some CPR. I took a class at school. That's good. Help is on the way. The man's head rolled slightly. Annie dropped the phone to speaker and leaned closer. No. Look at me, she said. Open your eyes, sir. You hear me? I need you to keep looking at me. His eyelids lifted. His gaze found her for half a second. Unfocused but frightened. He looked younger than she first thought. Maybe around 50, though pain had carved years into his face. He was handsome in the way powerful men often were, clean-shaven, sharp-jawed, someone who probably had people open doors for him before he reached them, but none of that mattered now. His money could not breathe for him. His watch could not call for help. His name, whatever it was, meant nothing against the blue tint creeping into his lips. What's your name? Annie asked. Can you tell me? His mouth moved. She bent lower. What? He rasped. Arthur, she guessed. His fingers tightened faintly around hers. Okay, Arthur, I'm Annie. My name is Annie Carter. I'm right here with you. For a moment, something changed in his eyes. Not recognition. Exactly. More like relief, at hearing a human voice that did not want anything from him except to keep him alive. Then his face twisted with pain. My drink, he whispered. Annie frowned. Your drink? His breath hitched. Family. The word was so faint she almost missed it. Your family? You want me to call your family? His eyes shifted, and fear crossed his face. Not confusion, fear. Annie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Arthur, listen to me. Don't try to talk right now. The ambulance is coming. The dispatcher's voice cut in from the phone. Ma'am, keep him as still as possible. Emergency services are 3 minutes out. 3 minutes, Annie repeated to him. You hear that? 3 minutes. You can give me 3 minutes. His eyes started to close again. No. Annie placed her palm against his cheek and tapped gently. Then a little firmer. No, sir, not yet. Stay with me. Tell me something. Do you have kids? A wife? Somebody waiting on you? His face tightened, but he did not answer. Okay, then listen to me, she said, trying to steady her own breathing. My mama says stubborn people live longer because they're too hard-headed to leave when they're told. So be stubborn, Arthur. Be real stubborn. A faint sound came from his throat. It might have been pain. It might have been the smallest attempt at a laugh. Annie almost cried from relief. That's right, she said. Stay mad if you have to. Stay awake. Rain slid down her forehead and into her eyes. Her knees hurt. Her hand was going numb from the cold, but she did not let go of him. Only then did the other fear return. What would people see if they came now? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Arthur made a choking sound. Annie leaned over him again. I'm here. I'm not leaving. The dispatcher asked, Ma'am, are you still with me? Yes, Annie said. I'm still here. In the distance, sirens began to rise. Arthur's eyes opened a little. He stared at her like he was trying to memorize her face through pain, rain, and darkness. Annie bent close so he would not have to search for her. That's it, she said. Hear those sirens? They're coming for you. His lips moved again. She lowered her ear. Don't let, he breathed. The rest disappeared. Don't let what? Annie asked. Arthur, don't let what? But his eyes rolled back, and his body went slack. Arthur? Annie's voice cracked. Arthur, no. No, no. The dispatcher became sharper. Is he breathing? Annie put her ear near his mouth, then checked his chest. I don't know. It's shallow. I can't tell. Check for a pulse. Annie pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. For a second, she felt nothing but rain and her own panic. I feel it, she said. It's there, but it's weak. Stay with him. Paramedics are arriving now. The sirens screamed into the street beyond the alley. Red and white light bounced off the brick walls. Boots splashed through puddles. Voices called out. Over here, Annie shouted. Please, over here. 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and medical bags. One knelt beside Arthur. The other looked at Annie. You called it in? Yes, she said, backing up on her knees. He said his chest hurt. He's cold. He was talking. But then he just... You did good, the paramedic said, already working. Step back for us. Annie stood on shaky legs. Her jeans were soaked, her palms scraped, her whole body trembling now that someone else had taken over. They lifted Arthur onto the stretcher. As they rolled him toward the ambulance, his hand slipped from under the blanket and hung briefly over the side. Annie stared at it. Miss? One paramedic called. We may need your statement. You riding with us? Annie hesitated. Every instinct told her to go home, to disappear, to return to her mother and pretend this night had never happened. Then she remembered Arthur's eyes, the fear in them when he said family. She picked up her phone from the wet ground and followed the stretcher toward the flashing lights. The ambulance doors slammed shut with Annie inside. She sat on the narrow bench, pressed against the wall, trying to make herself smaller while the paramedics worked over Arthur. One of them cut open his shirt. Another placed pads on his chest and spoke in quick, practiced sentences that Annie could only half understand. Pulse is weak. Pressure's dropping. Sir, can you hear me? Arthur did not answer. Annie stared at his face. Without the rain and darkness, he looked even paler. The hard lines around his mouth made him seem like a man who was used to giving orders, not lying helpless beneath bright ambulance lights, while strangers fought to keep his heart beating. The paramedic nearest Annie glanced over. You family? No, Annie said. I just found him. You know his name? He said Arthur. That's all. The paramedic checked Arthur's wallet, and his expression changed. Arthur Whitmore. The other paramedic looked up for half a second. That Arthur Whitmore? Annie heard the name but did not know what to do with it. It sounded familiar in the way names from billboards and business news sounded familiar. Important, distant, not part of her world. He said something, she added. The paramedic kept working. What did he say? Annie hesitated. Something about his drink, then family. The 2 paramedics exchanged a quick look, but neither asked more. The ambulance turned hard, and Annie grabbed the metal rail beside her. Sirens carved a path through traffic. Outside the small rear window, Chicago blurred into streaks of white and red. She thought of her mother waiting at the kitchen table. Her phone was in her hand. wet and smudged. She wanted to text Grace, but her fingers would not move. What could she say? I found a man dying in an alley. I'm in an ambulance with him. I don't know when I'll be home. Instead, she held the phone and watched Arthur's chest rise under an oxygen mask. At the hospital, everything happened too fast. The ambulance backed into the emergency bay. Doors flew open. Nurses and doctors took over. Someone asked Annie to step aside. Someone else asked her name, where she found him, what time she called 911. Annie Carter, she said. I was walking home. I heard him fall. A nurse handed her a towel for her hands. Annie looked down and saw dirt under her nails, rainwater on her sleeves, a scrape across one palm she had not felt until then. You can wait over there, the nurse said, not unkindly. Someone may need to speak with you. Annie nodded and walked into the waiting area. The place smelled like disinfectant, coffee, and worry. A man in work boots slept upright with his arms crossed. A woman whispered into a phone near the vending machines. A little boy leaned against his grandmother, both of them wrapped in the tired silence of people who had been there too long. Annie chose a chair near the wall. Her jeans were damp. Her knees ached from the alley. She set her phone on her lap and finally texted her mother. I'm okay. Had to help someone. At hospital. I'll explain. Please don't worry. Grace called immediately. Annie closed her eyes for 1 second, then answered. Mama, I'm okay. What hospital? Northwestern. Annie, I know, I'm sorry. A man collapsed. I called 911. They asked me to come because I found him. Are you hurt? No, ma'am. Just wet. Grace was quiet for a breath. Annie could hear the old kitchen clock ticking through the phone. Do you need me there? No. Please don't come out this late. I'm just giving a statement and coming home. You call me before you leave. I will. And Annie? Yes, ma'am? You did right. Annie swallowed. I hope so. She hung up and looked toward the double doors where they had taken Arthur. For a while, nobody came out. She wondered if he was alive. She wondered if he had a wife, children, someone who would arrive breathless and grateful. She wondered whether he would remember her name. Then the front entrance opened, and the air in the waiting room changed. A man in a tailored navy coat came in first, moving fast, phone in hand. He was in his 30s, clean cut, with the kind of face that looked calm because it had never been forced to be anything else. Behind him came a woman in a cream coat, hair pinned neatly, diamonds at her ears. 2 other relatives followed, along with a security man who looked around as if the hospital itself were an inconvenience. The man went straight to the desk. Arthur Whitmore. He was brought in by ambulance. The nurse asked his relation. Daniel Whitmore. I'm his nephew. Annie sat still. Daniel Whitmore. Arthur Whitmore. The names fit together, and with them came a cold feeling in her stomach. The nurse gave him limited information and pointed toward the waiting area until a doctor could speak with them. Daniel turned, scanning the room. His eyes moved over the sleeping man, the grandmother, the vending machines, then stopped on Annie, not because he recognized her, because she did not belong to the picture he expected. He walked toward her slowly. Were you with my uncle? Annie stood because her mother had raised her not to sit while an adult addressed her. I found him, sir. In the alley. I called 911. Daniel's eyes moved from her wet coat to her worn shoes. You found him? Yes. In an alley? Yes, sir. The woman in the cream coat came closer. Daniel, who is this? She says she found Uncle Arthur. The woman looked at Annie with a tight, polished smile that held no warmth. And what were you doing in that alley? Annie felt the eyes of the room shifting toward her. Walking home from work. I heard him fall. From work where? Daniel asked. Adiner. What diner? Annie hesitated. Mabel's. On Huron. Daniel gave a small nod, as if every answer confirmed a private suspicion. And you just happened to be there. I was taking a shortcut. A shortcut behind private restaurants near midnight? The words were not loud, but they landed hard. Annie kept her voice steady. I missed my bus. The woman crossed her arms. Did you know who he was? No, Mom. You didn't recognize Arthur Whitmore? No. Daniel leaned slightly closer. Did you touch his wallet? Annie blinked. What? His wallet. His watch. Anything in his pockets. I was trying to help him breathe. That's not what I asked. Heat rose in Annie's face. I didn't take anything. I didn't say you took anything. But he had. Everyone heard it. The woman looked Annie over again. Girls like you should be careful about getting involved with men like Arthur. Annie's mouth went dry. Girls like me? Daniel sighed, as if she were making this difficult. My aunt means this is a serious situation. A wealthy man collapses, and a stranger is found alone with him. You understand how that looks. Annie did understand. That was the worst part. She had understood it before the ambulance ever came. He was dying, she said. I wasn't thinking about how it looked. A doctor came through the double doors before Daniel could answer. The family turned at once, leaving Annie standing there as if she had been dismissed from her own story. Mr. Whitmore is stable for now, the doctor said. He suffered a major cardiac event. The next few hours are important. The woman covered her mouth. Daniel lowered his head, but Annie watched his hands. They did not shake. His face had arranged itself into concern, but his body looked ready, alert, almost annoyed. The doctor added, whoever began care before the ambulance arrived likely helped prevent a worse outcome. For one brief second, Annie thought someone might turn to her. No one did. Daniel spoke to the doctor. We'll need to know exactly what happened before he arrived here. Annie stepped forward. He said something in the alley. Daniel turned back to her. Something flashed in his eyes. What? He said, my drink. And then he said, family. I don't know what he meant. The woman went still. Daniel smiled, but now it looked forced. He was having a heart attack. People say all kinds of things when they're confused. I'm just telling you what I heard. And you've told us. His voice sharpened. Now I think it's best you go home. The doctor looked between them. We may still need her statement. Daniel did not take his eyes off Annie. Of course. Through proper channels. The woman stepped closer and lowered her voice, though not enough. If this is about money, young lady, don't embarrass yourself. Annie stared at her. For a moment, she saw the alley again, Arthur's cold face, his hand gripping hers, the weak pulse under her fingers. She had held a stranger between life and death. And now his family was looking at her like dirt tracked onto a clean floor. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to say she had missed her bus, ruined her clothes, scraped her hand, and scared herself half to death for a man whose own blood did not seem grateful he was alive. But the words gathered behind her teeth and stayed there. Annie picked up her wet phone from the chair. I hope he lives, she said. Daniel said nothing. The woman looked away first. Annie walked out through the sliding glass doors into the cold night. The rain had stopped, but the city still smelled of it. She stood beneath the hospital awning and called her mother. Grace answered on the first ring. Baby? Annie looked back once at the bright windows above her. Somewhere inside, Arthur Whitmore was alive. I'm coming home, Annie said. Her mother heard what Annie did not say. What happened? Annie wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. She had not realized she was crying. I did the right thing, Mama, she said. So why did they make me feel like I did something wrong? The ride home felt longer than it should have. Annie sat near the back of the bus with her coat still damp and her hands tucked between her knees. The heater under the seat made a tired rattling sound, pushing out air that was warm near her ankles and useless everywhere else. A man in a construction jacket slept with his chin on his chest. Two nurses in blue scrubs spoke quietly across the aisle, their voices low from the kind of exhaustion Annie recognized even though she was only 18. Chicago rolled past the windows in pieces, closed storefronts, gas stations, wet sidewalks, traffic lights blinking red over empty intersections. The city looked different after midnight. Not worse exactly, just more honest. The bright signs were off. The polished windows were dark. What remained were people going home from shifts nobody talked about at dinner parties. Annie held her phone in both hands. Her mother had wanted to come meet her, but Annie had said no 3 times until Grace finally agreed to wait at home. Even then, Annie knew her mother would not sleep. Grace Carter had never been good at waiting, especially when the person she loved most was somewhere out in the city with a broken voice. When the bus reached South Side, Annie stepped down into the cold and walked the last block to their apartment building. It was a 3-story brick place with a loose front step, a hallway that always smelled faintly of bleach, and a radiator that clanked like somebody arguing behind the walls. Their unit was on the second floor. The light under the door was on. Grace opened it before Annie could use her key. "Oh, baby." That was all she said at first. She pulled Annie inside, took one look at her wet jeans and scraped palms, and guided her to the kitchen chair the way she used to when Annie was little, and came home with a bleeding knee. "I told you I was okay," Annie said. "You said you were alive. That is not the same thing." Grace wore an old blue robe over her nightgown. Her hair was wrapped in a scarf, and her slippers made soft sounds on the linoleum as she moved to the stove. There was a small pot of chicken soup warming on low heat, 2 bowls beside it, and a sleeve of crackers open on the table. Next to the salt shaker sat Grace's pill organizer, the one with the lids marked by day. Annie saw it and felt a familiar pinch of guilt. Her mother should have been asleep hours ago. "Sit," Grace said. "I am sitting." "Then sit like you mean it." Annie let her shoulders drop. Grace washed Annie's scraped palm with warm water at the sink. She did it carefully, not fussing, not scolding, just pressing a clean cloth around the raw skin. Her hands were not as steady as they used to be, but they were gentle. "Tell me from the beginning," Grace said. Annie looked toward the window above the sink. The glass reflected the kitchen back at her. The small table, the old cabinets, the magnets holding unpaid bills to the refrigerator. Her mother standing behind her with worry pressed into every line of her face. "I was walking home," Annie began. "I missed the bus. I took the shortcut behind those restaurants downtown." Grace paused. "Annie, I know. That alley?" "I know, Mama." Grace closed her eyes for a second, then kept cleaning the scrape. "Go on." "I heard something fall. I thought it was trash. Then I heard him, making this sound." Annie swallowed. "He was on the ground, a white man, nice suit. I didn't know who he was. He was cold, Mama." His face was so cold. Grace's expression changed. The mother in her was still afraid, but the old nursing assistant was listening now. "Chest pain?" "Yes." He kept holding here. Annie pressed a hand to her chest. "He could barely talk. I called 911. I tried to keep him awake. You did right. He said his name was Arthur. Then later they said Arthur Whitmore." Grace's hand stopped. "You know him?" Annie asked. "I know the name. Everybody in Chicago knows that name if they ever watched the business news in a waiting room long enough." Grace rinsed the cloth. "Whitmore Capital. Buildings, real estate, money that knows other money." Annie gave a tired little laugh, but it did not last. Grace put a bandage across Annie's palm. "What happened at the hospital?" Annie looked down. That was where the story got harder. The alley had been frightening, but at least there she had known what to do. Breathe. Call. Keep him awake. The hospital had been clean and bright and full of people, yet somehow it had made her feel smaller than the alley ever did. "His family came," Annie said. "His nephew, Daniel. Some woman. I think his aunt or something. They asked why I was there, why I was in the alley, whether I touched his wallet." Grace's jaw tightened, but she did not interrupt. "They acted like I planned it, like I saw a rich white man fall and thought, good, maybe this is my chance." "Did anyone thank you?" Annie shook her head. "The doctor said whoever helped before the ambulance probably saved him." Nobody looked at me. Grace turned away and ladled soup into a bowl, but Annie saw her mother's shoulders rise and fall once, slow and controlled. "What did you say?" Grace asked. "I told them I hoped he lived. Then I left." Grace set the bowl in front of her. "Eat." "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway. Hurt feelings do worse on an empty stomach." Annie took the spoon because arguing would only make Grace more tired. The soup was warm and salty, with soft carrots and bits of chicken. It should have comforted her. Instead, the first bite made her throat close. Grace sat across from her. "Baby, listen to me. What they did was wrong. They looked at me like I was dirty. You are not. I know that. Do you?" Annie stirred the soup. "I keep thinking maybe I should have walked away." Grace's face softened, but her voice did not. "No. Mama, you didn't see them." "No, but I know people like that. I have seen them in hospitals, in offices, in stores where they follow you with their eyes and pretend they are not. Some folks can watch you save a life and still wonder what you stole on the way out." Annie's eyes filled again. She hated it. She had cried enough for one night. Grace reached across the table and covered her good hand. Their suspicion is not your sin. Annie stared at their hands. Grace's skin was darker than hers, thinner now, marked by years of work and small burns from kitchen pans, cleaning chemicals, hospital soap. Those hands had raised her, fed her, braided her hair, checked her homework, held her through fevers and bad dreams. Annie had grown up trusting those hands more than anything in the world. He said something, Annie whispered. Grace leaned in. Who? Arthur. In the alley. He said my drink, then family. When I told them at the hospital, Daniel got strange. Like he didn't want me saying it. Grace went still. I don't know what it means, Annie said quickly. Maybe nothing. He was sick. Maybe he was confused. Maybe. The words sat between them. Outside, a car passed slow on the street below. Its headlights slid across the kitchen wall and disappeared. Annie turned toward the window without meaning to. Grace noticed. You scared? Annie nodded, and for the first time that night, she let herself look 18. I just wanted to come home, she said. I wanted to finish my shift. Catch the bus. Bring you that pie Miss Mabel gave me. I didn't ask for any of this. I know. I don't want trouble with rich people. They have lawyers for breakfast. Grace almost smiled. And probably don't season their eggs. Annie gave a broken laugh, and that small sound loosened something in the room. Grace stood slowly, her knees giving their usual complaint, and went to the cabinet above the fridge. She took down an old cookie tin, blue with faded snowflakes on the lid. Annie knew it well. Inside were birth certificates, insurance papers, emergency cash, and things Grace believed mattered enough to survive a fire. From it, Grace pulled out a photograph of Annie at 8 years old, wearing a paper nurse's cap from a school career day. Annie had a gap-toothed grin and a plastic stethoscope around her neck. You remember this? Grace asked. Annie looked at it. Barely. You came home that day and told me you were going to be a nurse because nurses tell people the truth gently. I said that? You did. Then you tried to take my blood pressure with a jump rope. Annie smiled for real this time, small but real. Grace placed the photo beside the bowl. This is who you are. Not what those people saw, not what they feared, not what they accused. You are the girl who stopped in the rain. Annie touched the edge of the photograph. What if stopping ruins everything? She asked. What if I lose hours at work because people find out? What if the police come asking questions? What if that family says I did something? Grace sat down again, tired now but firm. Then we answer with the truth. The truth doesn't always win. No, Grace said. Not always. Not fast. Sometimes justice comes late, limping like an old man with bad knees. But that doesn't mean we lock the door when it finally gets here. Annie looked at her mother and understood why people at the care home had trusted Grace. She had a way of making courage sound less like a speech and more like washing your hands, paying a bill, getting up the next morning. After soup, Annie changed into dry clothes. Her room was small, just wide enough for a bed, a dresser, and the desk where she kept college brochures, stacked under a chipped lamp. On the wall was a calendar with application deadlines circled in blue ink. Under the bed sat her own tin box, smaller than Grace's, with college fund written on masking tape across the top. Annie pulled it out and opened it. Inside were folded bills, coins in paper rolls, a letter from a community college, and a list of nursing programs she had copied from the library computer. She added Mr. Peterson's $2.75 to the pile, then stopped. From her coat pocket, she took out the damp hospital visitor sticker someone had given her and no one had asked for back. It had the date on it, her name spelled Annie Carter, and below that, in small print, visitor. She almost threw it away. Instead, she folded it once and placed it in the tin. Not because she wanted to remember the hurt, because she needed to remember that she had been there, that a man had been dying, and she had not walked away. In the kitchen, Grace turned off the light. Try to sleep, baby. I will. But long after the apartment went quiet, Annie lay awake listening to the radiator knock in the wall. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Arthur's face in the alley and Daniel's face in the hospital. One man had looked at her like she was his last chance. The other had looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. Annie did not yet know which one would reach for her first. Arthur Whitmore woke to the sound of machines. At first, he thought he was hearing rain against glass. A soft, steady rhythm. Then the sound sharpened into beeps. A low hum, the faint hiss of oxygen near his face. His eyelids felt heavy, as if someone had stitched sleep into them. When he forced them open, white light cut across the room and made him turn his head away. Pain answered from inside his chest. Not sharp now. Deep. Bruised. Waiting. A nurse stepped into view. "Mr. Whitmore? Can you hear me?" Arthur tried to speak, but his throat was dry. "Don't push," she said, reaching for a cup with a straw. Small sip. He drank enough to wet his mouth. The room came together slowly. Private hospital suite. Pale walls. Monitors beside the bed. IV line taped to his hand. A folded blanket across his legs. Someone had placed his watch on the side table. His suit was gone. His shirt was gone. He felt stripped down to the one thing money could not protect, a failing body. "What happened?" he asked. "You had a serious cardiac event. You're stable, but you need rest. The doctor will be in shortly." Arthur closed his eyes. Cardiac event. Clean words. Safe words. Words people used when they did not want to say a man had come close to dying. Then another voice moved through his memory. "Open your eyes, sir." Arthur's eyes opened again. Not the nurse. Younger. Female. Afraid, but steady. "Please, stay with me." He tried to hold on to the sound before it slipped away. Rain. Brick walls. Cold ground under his shoulder. A face above him. Dark eyes. A hand against his cheek. The nurse checked the monitor. "Your family has been waiting. Would you like me to tell them you're awake?" Arthur stared at the ceiling. Family. The word did not bring comfort. It brought the taste of something bitter on his tongue. A glass. Amber liquid. Daniel standing near the bar in the private conference room. Margaret saying he worked too hard. A toast, maybe. Or had that been earlier? Arthur tried to follow the memory, but it broke apart. "Mr. Whitmore?" the nurse asked. "Not yet," he said. She paused. "All right." But the door opened before she reached it. Daniel Whitmore came in first, wearing concern like an expensive coat. Behind him was Margaret, eyes red but makeup perfect, one hand pressed to her chest. Two other relatives lingered near the doorway, whispering until they saw Arthur watching them. "Uncle Arthur." Daniel moved quickly to the bedside. Thank God. Arthur watched his nephew's face. Daniel had always been handsome in a polished way. The kind of man board members liked because he seemed calm in every room. Arthur had paid for his schools, fixed his mistakes, handed him opportunities and called it family duty. Now, lying in that bed, Arthur could not remember if he had ever seen Daniel look truly afraid. "How are you feeling?" Daniel asked. "Like a man who woke up in a hospital." Margaret stepped closer. "You scared us half to death." Arthur shifted his gaze to her. "Did I?" She blinked. "Arthur." What a thing to say. "What happened?" Daniel glanced at the nurse as if deciding how much should be said in front of her. "You collapsed downtown, behind one of the restaurants. An ambulance brought you in. I remember an alley." "Yes." Daniel lowered his voice. "There was a girl with you." Arthur's fingers moved against the sheet. "What girl?" "A stranger," Margaret said. "Some young girl. She claimed she found you." Arthur turned his head toward Daniel. "Claimed?" Daniel sighed, gentle and practiced. "We don't know what she was doing there. We don't want to jump to conclusions." "Then don't." A small silence followed. Margaret leaned in, softening her tone. "Arthur, dear, you were found in an alley late at night with a girl no one knows. She was wet, nervous, evasive. Daniel only wants to protect you." Arthur searched his memory again. Wet pavement, a hand holding his, a voice saying, "You can give me 3 minutes. Be stubborn." "She called the ambulance," he said. Daniel nodded. "That's what she said." "What did the paramedics say?" "That she was there when they arrived." "That isn't what I asked." Daniel's mouth tightened for less than a second. "They said she may have helped you." "May have?" Margaret made a faint sound. "Arthur, please. You need to rest, not worry about some girl from the street." The phrase struck him harder than she intended. Some girl from the street. Arthur saw the girl's face again, not clearly, but enough. Rain on her forehead, fear in her eyes. Not fear of being caught, fear that he would die before help came. "Where is she?" he asked. "She left," Daniel said, after making certain comments. "What comments?" Daniel looked at Margaret, then back at Arthur. "She told us, you said things in the alley." Arthur held still. "What things?" "Something about a drink, something about family. But you were oxygen, deprived, in pain." She could have misunderstood, or invented it. Arthur looked away from him and toward the window. The blinds were half closed. Beyond them, morning had started to press a gray line over Chicago. A drink. His mind moved carefully now, avoiding panic. He had been in the Whitmore Capitol conference room that evening. Not a formal board meeting. Family only. Daniel, Margaret, 2 cousins, 1 attorney on speakerphone. The discussion had turned ugly when Arthur mentioned revising his will and restructuring several trust provisions. He had not told them everything, only enough to test the room. He remembered Daniel's smile thinning. "You can't be serious," Daniel had said. Arthur had answered that he was very serious. The Whitmore Foundation would be expanded. Scholarships, medical training grants, community clinics. More money would leave family control than they expected. Margaret had called it emotional decision-making. Daniel had called it irresponsible. Then came the drink, a glass placed near his right hand, not by a server. The staff had already been dismissed. Arthur closed his eyes. Who had poured it? Daniel's voice cut in. "Uncle Arthur?" Arthur opened his eyes. "I want to speak to my doctor." "Of course," Daniel said. "I'll get him." "Alone." Daniel did not move. "There's no need for that." Arthur turned his head slowly. The movement hurt, but he let the pain sharpen his voice. "I said, alone." Margaret's expression hardened. "Arthur, after everything tonight, don't shut out the people who love you." "Love," Arthur said. "That word is getting a lot of exercise this morning." Daniel stepped closer to the bed. "You're confused. The doctor warned us you might be." "Did he?" "Yes. You suffered a major episode. You may not remember things correctly." Arthur studied him. "That would be convenient." The room went quiet. Daniel's eyes changed first. Not enough for anyone else to notice, maybe. But Arthur saw it. A flash of anger. Then control. "You should rest," Daniel said. "I should." Arthur reached for the call button. Daniel moved as if to help, but Arthur pressed it himself. When the nurse returned, Arthur said, "Please ask Dr. Patel to come in." And clear the room. Margaret drew herself up. "We are his family." The nurse looked uncertain. Wealth did that to people. It made them hesitate before ordinary rules. Arthur saved her the trouble. "They are leaving." Daniel's face stayed smooth. "We'll be right outside." "No," Arthur said. "Uncle, not outside. Not in the hall. Not on this floor unless I ask for you." Margaret's mouth parted. "You cannot mean that." Arthur looked at her, then at Daniel. "Get out." The words cost him more strength than he wanted to show. His pulse jumped on the monitor, and the nurse glanced at the screen. Daniel noticed too. For a moment, Arthur thought his nephew might argue anyway. Instead, Daniel buttoned his coat. "Of course," he said quietly. "We'll give you time." It sounded kind. It was not. Margaret left first. The others followed. Daniel was last. At the door, he turned back. "You're alive because we got you the best doctors," he said. Arthur did not answer. When the door closed, the room seemed to exhale. Dr. Patel arrived a few minutes later. A compact man with tired eyes and a direct manner Arthur appreciated. He explained the heart attack, the unstable rhythm, the intervention that followed. Arthur listened until the medical terms gave way to the questions sitting beneath them. "Was this natural?" Arthur asked. Dr. Patel paused. Arthur had spent 30 years reading pauses in conference rooms. This one had weight. "I need a straight answer," Arthur said. "We're still running tests." That was not a straight answer. Dr. Patel folded his hands. "There are findings that require more analysis. Certain substances can aggravate cardiac vulnerability." "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm saying I want a toxicology panel completed before I call this routine." Arthur looked at the IV taped to his hand. Who has access to my medical information? Your authorized physician, your designated emergency contacts, and anyone you've granted access to through your office or personal staff. Family? If listed. Arthur almost laughed, but his chest punished the attempt. After the doctor left, Arthur lay still and let the truth approach him in pieces. He had built companies, towers, accounts, contracts thick enough to stop bullets. Yet a drink in a room full of blood relatives had nearly ended him, and the person who reached for him had been a stranger they dismissed as trash. He reached for the phone beside the bed. His hand shook. He hated that. The hospital operator connected him to his office line. It took nearly a minute before the familiar voice answered. Samuel Reed. Samuel. A pause, then a breath. Mr. Whitmore. Thank God. Arthur closed his eyes. There it was. Real concern, not polished, not performed. I need you at the hospital, Arthur said. I'm already on my way. I've been downstairs trying to get past your family. Don't speak to them. I had no intention of doing so more than necessary. Despite the pain, Arthur felt the edge of a smile. Samuel had worked beside him for nearly 27 years. He was formal, careful, and loyal in the old-fashioned sense, which meant his loyalty was not blind. He would tell Arthur the truth even when the truth was inconvenient. Bring my private files, Arthur said. The estate revisions, security logs from last night, access records for my medication, everything. Samuel was silent for a beat. Do you believe this was intentional? I believe I woke up. Understood. And Samuel? Yes, sir. There was a young woman. Annie, I think. Annie Carter. She found me in the alley. She called 911. I'll locate her. Quietly. Of course. Arthur stared at the ceiling, hearing again the voice that had pulled him back. Open your eyes, sir. His throat tightened, but his voice stayed firm. Find the girl who saved me, he said. Before they do, Samuel Reed arrived at Northwestern Memorial with a leather folder under one arm and the face of a man who had already decided the morning would not be allowed to surprise him. He was 63, tall, narrow-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal overcoat that had been brushed clean despite the rain. His hair, once black, had gone silver at the temples, and he carried himself with the quiet discipline of someone raised to lower his voice before raising his hand. He had served Arthur Whitmore for almost 3 decades, first as an executive assistant, then as chief of staff, though Arthur still called him simply Samuel, because titles had never mattered between them as much as trust. Daniel was waiting near the private elevators with a paper cup of coffee he had not drunk. Samuel, Daniel said, he's not seeing anyone. Samuel stopped just outside the elevator doors. Mr. Whitmore called me. He's confused. The doctor said he needs rest. Then I'll be restful. Daniel's smile did not reach his eyes. This isn't a business meeting. No, Samuel said. It appears to be something worse. For a moment, neither man moved. Daniel was young enough to think silence could be used as pressure. Samuel was old enough to know silence could also be a wall. Margaret stood a few feet away, arms folded. Arthur is shutting out his own family. Surely you can see how unhealthy that is. Samuel turned to her with a small, formal nod. Mrs. Whitmore, I have seen Mr. Whitmore shut out federal regulators, hostile board members, and a senator who mispronounced his name twice. Family is not a new category of resistance for him. This is not funny. I did not intend it to be. Daniel stepped closer. Whatever Arthur asked you to bring, it can wait. I disagree. I'm his nephew, and I am following his direct instruction. Daniel's jaw tightened. You work for the family. Samuel looked at him then, fully. No. I work for Arthur Whitmore. The elevator opened behind him. A nurse who had been watching from the desk glanced down quickly, pretending not to hear. Samuel entered without another word and rode up to the restricted floor. Arthur was sitting slightly raised when Samuel entered the room. His face was drawn, but his eyes were awake in a way Samuel knew well. It was the look Arthur got before ending a partnership, firing a liar, or signing something that changed a room. You look terrible, Samuel said. Arthur's mouth moved toward a smile. Good morning to you too. I considered lying, but you pay me not to. Close the door. Samuel did. Then he placed the leather folder on the rolling table beside the bed. Estate drafts, security access summaries, medication logs from your residence and office, as far as I could retrieve them without alerting half the building. Daniel already knows something is wrong. Daniel has known many things were wrong long before this morning. He simply preferred when they benefited him. Arthur looked at the folder but did not open it yet. The girl, Annie Carter. I have a preliminary name match from the ambulance intake and the 911 record. 18 years old. South Side address. Works at Mabel's Diner on Huron. Recently graduated from Wendell Phillips Academy. Arthur absorbed each detail quietly. 18. Yes. They treated her like a criminal. Samuel did not ask who. I suspected as much when Mrs. Whitmore used the phrase, that alley girl downstairs. Arthur shut his eyes. The words seemed to hurt more than the IV in his arm. She kept me alive, he said. I believe that is what the paramedic noted. Early intervention by the caller likely improved outcome. Arthur opened his eyes. Do not turn her into a line in a report. I wasn't. No. I know. Samuel waited. Arthur reached for the folder. His hand trembled halfway there, and Samuel moved as if to help, then stopped. Arthur would rather fight the sheet, the pain, and the weakness than be handled like a helpless man. He got the folder open himself. The first page was a summary of access records from the private conference level at Whitmore Capital. Camera outage? Arthur asked. 12 minutes, 8:47 to 8:59 p.m. That floor does not have outages. It does when someone disables the secondary relay. Who had access? Security Supervisor Marcus Vale. Hired 14 months ago. Recommended by Daniel. Arthur read the next line. Payment? 2 deposits into an LLC linked to Mr. Vale's brother, small enough to miss unless one was annoyed. Are you annoyed, Samuel? Deeply. Arthur turned the page. Medication access. Your office emergency kit was opened yesterday afternoon, logged under Executive Family Authorization. Arthur looked up. Family authorization? Daniel's code. The monitor beside the bed picked up a faster rhythm. Samuel glanced at it but said nothing. Arthur's voice stayed controlled. Could be explained. Many sins can be explained. Fewer can be explained well. Arthur read further. And the drink? The glass was removed before standard cleaning documentation. Staff says Daniel dismissed them early and told them family would handle the room. Arthur leaned back. The motion was small, but it drained color from his face. Samuel reached toward the nurse call button. You need a break. I need answers. You need to live long enough to use them. Arthur gave him a dry look. That was almost sentimental. I apologize. No, you don't. No. For a minute, neither spoke. Outside the window, Chicago moved beneath a low gray sky. Arthur had spent much of his life above that city, in offices high enough that people became dots and traffic became streams of light. He had believed height gave perspective. Now he wondered if it had only made distance feel like wisdom. Annie heard me, he said. Samuel's expression changed slightly. What did you say? I don't remember all of it. Drink, family, maybe enough. Then she may be in danger. Arthur looked at him. That is why I said find her before they do. I can contact Detective Bennett. Quietly. Do it. She will want evidence before involving police resources. Give her the file. Samuel nodded. And Annie? Not by phone. Not with anyone who can be traced through my office. Go to the diner if needed. Speak to her with respect. If she refuses to meet, do not pressure her. I know how to speak to a young woman who has been wronged. Arthur looked down at his hands. Do you? I had daughters, Arthur. The room went still. Samuel rarely mentioned them. One lived in Seattle now, an attorney with 2 children. The other had died at 22 in a car accident caused by a man too drunk and too well connected to spend more than 6 months in jail. Samuel's loyalty to rules had not come from innocence. It had come from knowing what happened when rules bent for the powerful. Arthur lowered his voice. I'm sorry. I know. Samuel picked up the folder again. That is why I will ask carefully when I find Miss Carter. And it is why you will not rush into gratitude like it is a press release. Arthur looked tired. I was going to write her a check. I assumed. That is why I said it. Despite everything, Arthur gave a short breath that nearly became a laugh. Samuel continued. If she saved your life, you owe her more than money. You owe her the truth. You owe her safety. And you owe her the dignity your family denied her before she is asked to accept anything from you. Arthur turned toward the window. In the alley, he had felt the girl's hand on his face. not soft exactly. Cold from rain, trembling with fear, but present. She had not known his net worth. She had not known his board seats, his properties, his name engraved on buildings. She had known only that a man was dying. Find out what she needs, Arthur said. Samuel closed the folder. People rarely tell strangers what they need. Then find out what she dreams of. That made Samuel pause. Arthur looked back at him. Not for charity, for repair. Repair is more expensive than charity. I can afford it. With respect, Samuel said. That remains to be seen. Before Arthur could answer, a soft knock came. Dr. Patel entered with a tablet, followed by a hospital administrator who smiled too much and looked nervous to be in a room with Arthur Whitmore. We need to discuss visitors, security, and your care plan, Dr. Patel said. Arthur's eyes did not leave Samuel. No family visitors. The administrator shifted. Mr. Whitmore, your nephew has expressed concern. My nephew may express it to the parking garage. Dr. Patel lowered his tablet to hide what might have been a smile. Arthur continued. Only Dr. Patel, medical staff, Samuel Reed, and law enforcement if requested. No one else enters without my permission. I understand, the administrator said. Do you? Yes, sir. Arthur nodded. Good. When they left, Samuel put on his gloves. I'll start with Detective Bennett, he said. Then the diner. Samuel. He stopped at the door. If Annie is frightened, tell her I am sorry. I will. No, tell her I am alive because of her. Then tell her I am sorry. Samuel nodded once, and for the first time that morning, something in his face softened. I'll find her. After he left, Arthur lay back against the pillows. The pain medicine pulled at the edges of his mind, but he resisted sleep. Sleep had nearly taken him once already. He listened to the monitor and let each beep remind him of the girl in the rain. Somewhere across the city, Annie Carter was trying to return to a life that his family had already stepped into and dirtied. Arthur closed his eyes, not to rest, but to remember. Open your eyes, sir. He had. And now he could not look away. Detective Laura Bennett did not arrive at the hospital looking impressed. That was one of the first things Samuel noticed about her. She stepped out of the elevator in a dark coat, badge clipped to her belt, hair pulled back, eyes alert without being theatrical. She looked like a woman who had spent too many years listening to people lie and had learned not to waste her face on surprise. Samuel met her near the private floor waiting area. Detective Bennett? Mr. Reed? Yes. She glanced toward the hallway that led to Arthur's room. You said this was urgent, but not over the phone. That usually means someone rich is either scared, guilty, or both. Samuel gave a small nod. In this case, scared. The guilty part remains under review. That's almost refreshing. He handed her the folder. Mr. Whitmore had a cardiac event last night after a private family meeting. His physician has ordered toxicology tests. Certain access records suggest the event may not have been natural. Bennett did not open the folder immediately. Why come to me instead of having your attorneys call the chief? Because attorneys call chiefs when they want influence. Mr. Whitmore wants an investigation. And what do you want? Samuel looked down the hall toward Arthur's room. I want the young woman who saved him not to disappear because frightened men with money decide she heard too much. That made Bennett open the folder. She read quickly. Not skimming. Not reacting for show. Camera outage. Security supervisor. Daniel's access code. Medical kit opened. Staff dismissed early. Missing glass. Possible toxin. Who else has seen this? She asked. Mr. Whitmore, myself, Dr. Patel regarding the medical side. Daniel Whitmore suspects there is concern, but not the scope. Daniel being the nephew? Yes. The one downstairs trying to control access? The same. Bennett closed the folder. I'll need the actual records, not summaries. You'll have them. I'll need the doctor willing to speak on the record once toxicology returns. He will. And the girl? Annie Carter, 18. She called 911 and rode with Mr. Whitmore to the hospital. She reported hearing him say, "my drink" and "family" while in distress. Bennett looked at him. 18. Yes. Does she know she may be a witness in an attempted murder case? I doubt she knows anything except that she was insulted by the Whitmore family and went home frightened. The detective's mouth tightened. That tracks. Samuel said nothing. Bennett handed the folder back. I can make quiet inquiries. But understand me, Mr. Reed. I would be concerned if you did. I don't work for you either. Even better, for the first time, Bennett almost smiled. Have Mr. Whitmore preserve every record. No internal cleanup. No private security freelancing. If he wants this done right, he doesn't get to act like a billionaire first and a victim second. I'll tell him. Tell him exactly. I tend to. Bennett turned toward the elevators, then stopped. And Mr. Reed, if somebody is already watching that girl, you call me before you play hero. Samuel's face did not change. I am past the age of playing hero. Detective. Good. Men your age usually say that right before doing something stupid. My age also teaches efficiency. Let's hope. By late afternoon, Samuel was standing outside Mabel's diner with his umbrella closed at his side. The rain had faded, but the sky still hung low over Chicago. The diner's red sign buzzed above the window, and through the glass he could see an older woman refilling napkin holders behind the counter. He entered quietly. A bell over the door gave him away. The woman looked up. Sit wherever you like. Thank you. I'm looking for Miss Annie Carter. That changed the room, though only by an inch. The woman's hands slowed. You a bill collector? No, Mum. Police? No. Then you can tell me why you're looking for an 18-year-old girl before I tell you whether I know her. Samuel inclined his head. He liked her immediately. My name is Samuel Reed. I work for Arthur Whitmore. Her face hardened. Then you can turn around and go back where you came from. I understand your reaction. No, you don't. That child came in this morning looking like somebody had wrung her out and hung her wrong. I don't know what your people said to her, but I know shame when I see it, and it wasn't hers. Samuel absorbed the words. You are Mrs. Dawson? He asked. Mabel, Mrs. Dawson, Mr. Whitmore is alive because Annie helped him. He knows that. He asked me to find her and tell her two things. First, that he is alive because of her. Second, that he is sorry. Mabel folded her arms. Sorry is cheap in rich neighborhoods. Yes, ma'am, often. That answer seemed to disturb her more than if he had defended himself. Samuel continued. I am not here to pressure her. I am not here to bring cameras or lawyers. I only need to know if she is safe. Mabel studied him. Behind her, the kitchen radio played an old country song, low and scratchy. A couple in the corner booth pretended not to listen. She isn't working today, Mabel said. I see. And if she was, I wouldn't hand her over to you like a lost purse. I wouldn't ask you to. You people got a way of asking without asking. Samuel nodded once. That is true. Mabel looked at him for a long moment. You always this agreeable? No. Usually I am considered difficult. By who? People who prefer not to answer questions. She gave a short sound that might have been a laugh if she had trusted him more. Samuel placed a business card on the counter, then wrote another number on the back by hand. This is my private number, not the office. If Annie wishes to speak, she may call. If she does not, she owes us nothing. Mabel did not touch the card. Then why find her? Samuel looked toward the wet street outside. Because men who hurt powerful people often fear witnesses. And men who hurt powerful people for money rarely show mercy to girls with bus passes. Mabel's face changed. You think she's in danger? I think caution would be wise. Mabel picked up the card then. Lord have mercy. Yes, Samuel said, though I prefer not to leave the whole matter to him. Across the city, Annie was at home trying to write an essay for a scholarship application. The prompt asked about a challenge she had overcome. She hated that prompt. It sat at the top of the page like a stranger asking to look through her drawers. People with money loved stories about overcoming. They wanted hardship folded neatly into 3 paragraphs with a hopeful ending, and no mention of how expensive it was to survive the lesson. Annie tapped her pen against the table. Grace sat in the living room with a heating pad over her knees, watching a daytime judge show with the volume low. You writing or punishing that paper? Grace called. Both. What's the question? Annie read it aloud. Grace snorted. Tell them you overcame not throwing the application in the trash. That might not get me accepted. It would be honest. Annie smiled, but her attention shifted to the window. A dark SUV rolled slowly past the building. She froze. It might have been nothing. People drove down their street all day. Delivery drivers, neighbors, men looking for parking, somebody's cousin with music too loud. But this SUV moved too slowly. Its windows were tinted, its tires cutting through shallow puddles near the curb. Annie waited for it to turn the corner. It did. She let out her breath. A minute later, it passed again. "Annie?" Grace's voice sharpened. Annie stood. Nothing. Grace turned off the television. The SUV stopped across the street. For several seconds, neither Annie nor Grace moved. The apartment seemed to hold its own breath. The radiator knocked once in the wall. A man sat behind the wheel. Annie could not see his face clearly, only the shape of him. Another man was in the passenger seat, head angled toward their building. Grace came slowly to the kitchen doorway. "Get away from the window." Annie stepped back, heart beating in her throat. "Do you know them?" Grace asked. "No." "Are you sure?" "No." Grace reached for her phone. "I'm calling the police." "And say what? A car is parked outside?" "Yes." "Mama, they'll ask if they threatened us, if they came up, if we have a plate." "Then get the plate." Annie looked again from the side of the curtain. The SUV pulled away before she could read more than a blur of letters. Grace cursed softly. Annie had heard her mother curse only a handful of times in her life, and never without good reason. A knock came at the apartment door. Both women turned. It came again, gentle but firm. Grace put one finger to her lips and motioned Annie behind her. She picked up the heaviest thing within reach, which happened to be a cast-iron skillet from the stove. "Mama," Annie whispered. "Hush." Grace went to the door but did not open it. "Who is it?" A man's voice answered through the wood. "Mrs. Carter? My name is Samuel Reed. I work for Arthur Whitmore. I am alone. I mean no harm." Annie's stomach dropped. Grace looked back at her daughter. The voice continued, calm and respectful. "If this is not a good time, I will leave my card under the door. Mr. Whitmore asked me to tell Miss Carter that he is alive because of her, and that he is deeply sorry." Annie stared at the door. After everything his family had said, after the hospital hallway, after the car outside, those words should not have mattered. But they did. Grace did not lower the skillet. "How did you find us?" "Through the emergency record and her workplace." "I realize that sounds intrusive. I apologize for that as well." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Are you alone?" "Yes, ma'am." Grace looked through the peephole, waited, then unlocked the door but kept the chain fastened. Samuel stood in the hall with both hands visible, his hat held politely against his chest. He looked first at Grace, then at Annie behind her. He did not scan the apartment. He did not look her up and down. "Miss Carter," he said, "Mr. Whitmore owes you his life. He knows that now." Annie's voice came out small. "Is he really okay?" "He is alive. Not well yet, but alive." She nodded, and some part of her she had been holding tight since the alley loosened. Samuel's expression remained gentle. "There is something else. You may not be safe." Grace's grip tightened on the skillet. Annie thought of the SUV. Samuel noticed. "Someone has already come?" Grace opened the door as far as the chain allowed. "You better start talking, Mr. Reed. And you better not talk like a lawyer." Samuel nodded. "Of course," he said. "I'll talk like a man who came too late, but not empty-handed." Grace unhooked the chain but did not put the skillet down. Samuel stepped inside only after she moved back, and even then he remained near the door, as if he understood that crossing too far into a stranger's home without trust was its own kind of insult. Annie noticed that first. He did not act like the apartment was small, though it was. He did not glance at the peeling paint near the window or the bills held to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a peach. He stood with his hat in both hands and waited to be told where to sit. Grace pointed to the kitchen chair across from Annie. "There." "Yes, ma'am." He sat. Annie stayed beside the counter, arms folded tight, still trying to decide whether this man was help or just trouble wearing good manners. He looked nothing like Daniel. There was no smooth smile, no lazy judgment in his eyes. But he came from Arthur Whitmore's world, and that alone made her careful. Grace set the skillet on the stove but stayed close to it. "Talk." Samuel nodded. Mr. Whitmore suffered more than a heart attack. His doctor has reason to believe something may have triggered it. Annie's stomach tightened. Something like what? A substance. Possibly placed in a drink before he collapsed. Grace leaned back against the counter. Poison? That word is dramatic but not inaccurate. Annie thought of Arthur's voice in the alley. My drink. Family. She looked at Samuel. He tried to tell me. Yes. And his family knew. Samuel did not answer quickly. That made Annie trust the answer more when it came. We believe at least one member of his family may be involved. We do not yet know how many. Grace crossed her arms. That nephew? Daniel Whitmore is a focus of concern. Grace let out a humorless breath. Concern. That's a clean word for a dirty thing. It is. Annie sat slowly. Her knees felt weak all at once. Why would they hurt him? Money, Samuel said. Control, a will they did not like. The usual reasons people pretend are complicated. The room went quiet except for the radiator ticking in the wall. Annie looked toward the window. The SUV was gone, but it felt present anyway, like a handprint left on glass. Those men outside, were they his people? I can't prove that yet, but you think so? Yes. Grace's face changed in a way Annie knew well. It was the look her mother got when fear turned into planning. Then we call the police. I have already spoken with Detective Laura Bennett. She is aware of the situation, but she needs evidence of a direct threat before she can move openly. If the men return, call 911 first, then this number. Samuel placed a card on the table and slid it toward Grace, not Annie. This reaches me at any hour. Grace looked at the card but did not pick it up. And what does Arthur Whitmore want from my daughter? Nothing. That is not an answer rich men usually give. It is the only honest one. He would like to apologize to her when she is ready. He also wants to make sure she is safe. Annie spoke for the first time in a while. Why didn't he tell his family I helped him? He did. They did not wish to hear it. No. At the hospital, before all this. Samuel's expression softened. He was unconscious then, Miss Carter. The way he said Miss Carter made her chest ache. Not girl, not witness, not problem. Miss Carter. Annie looked down at her bandaged palm. They made me feel like I did something wrong. Samuel's voice lowered. Mr. Whitmore knows. Not fully, perhaps, but enough to be ashamed. Grace tapped the table once with her finger. Ashamed is private. What matters is what he does in public. Samuel looked at her with respect. I agree. Annie almost laughed. You agree with everything? No. But your mother keeps being right. Grace picked up the card then, though she kept her face stern. Samuel turned back to Annie. There is one more thing. If anyone approaches you about that night, do not argue with them. Do not explain. Do not let them pull you away from a public place. Call Detective Bennett or me. I have work tomorrow. Grace said, No, you don't. Annie looked at her. Mama, I can't just not go. You can if somebody's following you. We need the money. We need you alive more. The words landed hard. Annie had no answer for them. Samuel did. If transportation is a concern, I can arrange. No, Annie said at once. He stopped. I'm not taking money from him. I was going to say a safe ride coordinated through Detective Bennett. But I understand. Annie felt heat rise in her face. I'm sorry. Don't be. Pride is not a flaw when it is all people have allowed you to keep. Grace studied him again. This time, some of the suspicion in her eyes shifted. Not gone, but moved aside enough to make room for thought. A phone buzzed in Samuel's coat pocket. He checked the screen, and his face changed by a fraction. Grace noticed. What? Samuel stood. Daniel has just asked hospital administration for Miss Carter's contact information, claiming the family needs it for insurance documentation. Annie's hands went cold. Can they give it to him? They should not. Should not? Grace said. Samuel was already putting on his gloves. Should not is why I prefer not to wait. He called someone before leaving the apartment. His voice remained calm, but the calm had sharpened. This is Samuel Reed. I need you to flag all records connected to the ambulance intake from last night. No release to family representatives, attorneys, private security, or corporate staff. Only medical necessity or law enforcement. Yes, I know who asked. That is why I'm calling. Annie watched him, and for the first time, she understood that manners did not mean weakness. Samuel Reed sounded like a locked door. When he ended the call, he turned to Grace. Please keep the curtains closed tonight. Grace nodded. To be clear, he added, I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to distrust the right people first. Grace picked the skillet up again and carried it to the sink. That might be the smartest thing you've said. Samuel looked at Annie. Miss Carter, I am sorry this reached your door. It was already at my door, Annie said. You just knocked. He accepted that. After he left, Grace locked the door, fastened the chain, and pushed a chair under the knob. Annie watched her do it without protest. You think he's telling the truth? Annie asked. Grace turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the lamp in the living room. I think he believes what he's saying. That's not the same thing. No, Grace said. But it's more than we had before. Neither of them slept much. The next morning, Chicago woke under a flat gray sky. Annie called Mabel to say she might be late. But Mabel cut her off before she could explain. You're not coming in today. Miss Mabel, I need the hours. You need breath in your body. Mr. Reed came by yesterday. Annie closed her eyes. He told you? Enough. And before you get proud with me, I'm putting you down for sick leave. I don't have sick leave. You do today. That's not how it works. It is when I own the pencil. Annie wanted to argue, but her throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't open the door to fools. By noon, a news clip about Arthur Whitmore's hospitalization was playing on every local station. The anchor called it a sudden medical emergency, following a private business dinner. There was no mention of Annie, no mention of the alley, no mention of a girl in wet clothes who had begged him to keep breathing. Annie watched for only a minute before Grace turned it off. You don't need strangers telling you what you lived, Grace said. But strangers were already talking. By evening, Daniel Whitmore sat in the back booth of an expensive club downtown, far from the apartment with the chain on the door. Across from him were Ray Collins and Victor Hale, both large men in dark jackets, both used to being paid in cash for work that stayed off invoices. Daniel slid a folded paper across the table. It had Annie's name, her building, and Mabel's diner written on it. Ray glanced at it. She a problem? She may become one. Victor smirked. What's she know? Daniel's eyes stayed flat. Enough to be confused. Confused people sometimes talk. You want her hurt? I want her quiet. Ray leaned back. Quiet how? Daniel looked toward the window where the city lights reflected on the glass. Scared people are usually quiet, especially when they have something to lose. Victor tapped the paper. She's just a kid. Daniel finally looked at him. Then it shouldn't be difficult. For a moment, even Ray said nothing. Daniel took out an envelope and placed it on the table. No hospitals. No police reports. No drama. Make her understand that forgetting my uncle is the best decision she will ever make. Ray picked up the envelope. And if she doesn't? He asked. Daniel's smile returned, small and cold. Everyone learns, he said. Some people just need a longer lesson. Annie found the first note under the apartment door just after breakfast. It was folded once, no envelope, the paper clean except for a wet corner where it had touched the hallway floor. She saw it before Grace did. For half a second, she thought it might be from a neighbor about laundry or the landlord about rent, ordinary trouble, the kind she knew how to handle. Then she opened it. Forget the man in the alley. That was all. No signature, no threat written in bold letters. No curse words. Somehow that made it worse. The message was quiet, almost polite, like the person who wrote it believed fear did not need to raise its voice. Grace came from the bedroom tying the belt of her robe. What's that? Annie folded the paper too quickly. Nothing. Grace stopped. Annie. It was under the door. Grace took it from her hand and read it. Her face did not change much, but Annie saw the small tightening near her mouth. Call Mr. Reed, Grace said. I don't want to drag him back here. Baby, he told us to call. I know, but what's he going to do? Stand in the hallway all day? Grace picked up the phone anyway. If a man comes to my house saying we may be in danger, then danger slides a note under my door. I'm not worrying about inconveniencing him. Samuel answered on the second ring. Grace put the call on speaker. Mrs. Carter? We got a note. Silence then. What does it say? Grace read it. Do not touch it more than necessary, Samuel said. Put it in a plastic bag if you have one. I'm contacting Detective Bennett. Annie leaned toward the phone. It's just paper. She can't arrest somebody for paper. No, Samuel said. But paper can become part of a pattern. Patterns matter. Grace gave Annie a look that said, listen. Did you see anyone in the hall? Samuel asked. No, Annie said. I found it after breakfast. Keep the door locked. If you leave, tell me first. Annie stiffened. I can't live like that. I'm not asking you to live like that. I'm asking you to get through today. That was harder to argue with. After the call, Grace put the note in a sandwich bag and laid it on the kitchen table as if it were something contagious. Annie tried not to look at it. She washed dishes that were already clean, straightened the stack of mail, checked her scholarship essay, then stared at the same sentence until the words stopped meaning anything. By noon, she needed air. I'm going to the corner store, she said. Grace looked up from her chair. No, you are not. Mama, it's 2 blocks. It could be 2 feet. We need milk. We have enough. For coffee, maybe, not for cereal. Grace lowered her glasses. You are not going outside because of cereal. Annie knew her mother was right, which made her more frustrated. I can't just sit here waiting for somebody to decide what I'm allowed to do. Grace's voice softened. That is exactly what fear wants you to feel. I already feel it. They looked at each other across the small room. Annie hated the worry in her mother's face. It made her feel both loved and trapped. Finally, Grace sighed. Fine. We both go. In daylight. We take the front street. We call Mr. Reed before we leave. Mama, or we do not go. So they went together, Grace walking slower than she wanted to admit, Annie carrying herself like she was not scanning every parked car. The corner store smelled of coffee, floor cleaner, and fried chicken from the warmer near the register. Mr. Alvarez, who had owned the place since Annie was in middle school, looked up from behind the counter. Annie, Mrs. Carter, you two all right? Grace smiled the way adults smile when they do not want to explain anything. We're getting there. Annie grabbed milk, bread, and a small bag of oranges because Grace liked to pretend fruit balanced out worry. Near the back aisle, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring. It buzzed again. Grace saw her face. Who is it? I don't know. Don't answer. The third time, Annie pressed decline hard enough to hurt her thumb. A text came a few seconds later. You should have stayed out of rich people's business. Annie felt the azle tilt. Grace took the phone. Her eyes moved across the message. She did not speak. She walked to the counter and said, Mr. Alvarez, we need to use your phone and we need the camera footage from outside if you have it. Mr. Alvarez's expression changed at once. Who's bothering you? Someone too cowardly to use his name. He came around the counter without another question. That was Southside. People might not have money, but they knew when to close ranks. Samuel arrived 20 minutes later, followed by Detective Bennett in an unmarked car. Bennett wore no dramatic expression, asked no useless questions, and took Annie's phone with gloved hands after getting permission. You received the first note this morning, she asked. Yes. And this text came here? Yes. You recognize the number? No. Bennett nodded. Good. Don't delete anything. Don't respond. People like this want fear, but they also want conversation. Conversation gives them room to pull you into mistakes. Annie stood near the canned goods, embarrassed by the attention, scared by the seriousness. Am I in trouble? Bennett looked at her. No, and I'm going to say that clearly because I get the feeling not enough people have. You are not in trouble. Annie blinked. Samuel, standing near the door, heard it too. His face remained composed, but his shoulders eased a little. Bennett continued, You helped a man who was dying. Somebody else may have a reason to make you afraid of that. That's on them. Grace put a hand on Annie's back. Mr. Alvarez had already copied the camera footage from the front door. It showed a dark SUV passing slowly along the curb 10 minutes before Annie and Grace arrived. The plate was partly blocked by a delivery truck, but Bennett watched the clip twice. That same vehicle outside your building? She asked. Annie nodded. I think so. Think or no? I think. The windows were tinted. Same size. Same color. Fair answer. Samuel stepped closer. Detective, I'll run what we can get from the image. It may not be enough yet, but it helps. Annie let out a small, bitter laugh before she could stop herself. Bennett looked over. Something funny? No, sorry. It's just, everything helps, but nothing is enough. The detective studied her for a moment. That's how cases start. One thing that helps, then another. Then the person who thought he was careful learns he wasn't. Grace said, I'd like to be there when that happens. I'll do my best, Bennett said. After they left the store, Samuel offered to drive Annie and Grace home. Annie almost refused, then saw her mother's tired face and nodded. The ride was quiet. Samuel drove an older black sedan, clean but not flashy. He did not ask personal questions. He did not fill silence to make himself comfortable. When they reached the apartment building, he checked the street before letting them out. Grace noticed. You've done this before, she said. I have worked for a wealthy man a long time. Wealth attracts two kinds of danger. The kind that wants in, and the kind already inside. Grace looked toward Annie. And which kind is this? Samuel did not soften the truth. The second. Upstairs, Annie placed the milk in the refrigerator and sat at the kitchen table. The sandwich bag with the note was gone now, taken by Bennett, but Annie could still see the words. Forget the man in the alley. She thought of Arthur's hand gripping hers in the rain. She thought of Daniel's eyes in the hospital. She thought of the text on her phone and the SUV moving slow past her home. Grace sat across from her. You don't have to be brave every minute. I'm not brave at all. Yes, you are. You're just young enough to think brave feels different. What does it feel like? Grace reached for one of the oranges and began peeling it with her thumb. Most days, like wanting to cry but doing the next right thing anyway. Annie watched the peel come away in one long curl. What's the next right thing? She asked. Grace separated the orange into pieces and pushed half toward her. Tonight, she said, we eat. We lock the door. We answer no unknown numbers. Tomorrow, we keep telling the truth. Annie picked up one orange slice. It tasted sharp and sweet. For the first time since the alley, she understood that the truth was not only something she remembered, it was something she might have to protect. Arthur Whitmore was not used to being told no, but Dr. Patel had done it 3 times before breakfast. No meetings, the doctor said, standing at the foot of the hospital bed with a tablet in one hand. No business calls, no family arguments, no dramatic speeches to anyone standing in this room or outside it. Arthur looked at Samuel, who stood near the window with a folder tucked under his arm. Samuel did not help him. You hear that? Arthur said. He thinks I make dramatic speeches. I have heard worse medical opinions, Samuel replied. Dr. Patel pointed at both of them. I'm serious. Your heart has been through enough. You may feel clear-minded, but your body is still recovering. My body can recover while my mind works. Your mind nearly got your body killed. Arthur did not answer that. Dr. Patel's voice softened, but only slightly. Mr. Whitmore, I understand there are legal concerns. I understand there may be danger. But if you ignore medical advice and collapse again, you will not be helping anyone, including the young woman you keep asking about. That reached him. Arthur looked away, toward the pale morning beyond the window. Chicago sat under a low sky, gray and hard-edged. Somewhere out there, Annie Carter was receiving notes under her door and messages from men too cowardly to show their faces. She had saved him once with nothing but courage and a phone. Now he was lying in a private room with security outside, and still could not keep danger from touching her. I want to see her, Arthur said. Dr. Patel closed the tablet. Not today. Tomorrow? If your numbers improve. Samuel spoke before Arthur could argue. Then tomorrow is the goal. Arthur gave him a tired look. You've become very fond of taking the doctor's side. I am fond of you remaining alive. Dr. Patel nodded. Excellent. Listen to him. When the doctor left, Arthur reached for the folder on his lap. Samuel moved it out of reach. Arthur stared at him. That was bold. It was necessary. I can fire you. You can try after your blood pressure comes down. Arthur leaned back against the pillows, annoyed and too weak to make the annoyance useful. Tell me about Annie. Samuel's expression shifted. She received a note this morning. Later, a text message at a corner store. Detective Bennett has both. There may be partial footage of the SUV. Arthur closed his eyes. Daniel, likely. Likely is not enough. No, but it is becoming heavier. Arthur opened his eyes again. How is she? 18. That is not an answer. It is the most accurate one. She is frightened, proud, polite when she should not have to be, and worried about money even while being threatened. Arthur's jaw tightened. The family did that. Daniel did more than that. Your family began it in the hospital hallway. They taught her that coming near you costs her dignity. Daniel is now trying to teach her it costs safety. Arthur looked at the ceiling. For years, he had believed harm came from decisions signed in boardrooms, contracts, layoffs, deals that reshaped neighborhoods from a distance. But this was closer. This had a face. A girl at a kitchen table, a mother holding a skillet behind a chained door. What does she want, he asked. To be left alone long enough to become a nurse. Samuel let the words sit. Arthur turned his head. A nurse? Yes. She has been saving for school. Mabel Dawson mentioned it. So did Mrs. Carter. There is a tin box with money in it, apparently labeled college fund. Arthur was silent. Samuel knew that silence. It was not confusion. It was calculation, but not the cold kind. Arthur was seeing columns, costs, structures, permanence. When Arthur decided money should move, it moved with purpose. Do not send anything yet, Samuel said. Arthur's eyes narrowed. You are reading my mind too often. After 27 years, it is more maintenance than talent. She should not have to worry about tuition after this. No, she should not. But if you offer money now, before the truth is secure, she may feel bought. Worse, Daniel may argue she had motive. Arthur's hand curled on the blanket. I hate that you're right. I have made peace with being inconvenient. Arthur breathed carefully through a flare of pain. Then we wait. We prepare. Arthur looked back at him. Meaning? Meaning if justice opens a door, you should be ready to hold it open for more than one girl. For the first time that morning, Arthur said nothing because there was nothing to argue with. Across town, Annie sat at Mabel's diner in a corner booth, though she was not on shift. Mabel had insisted she come in through the back door just after lunch, partly because Annie said she was tired of feeling trapped at home and partly because Mabel wanted to see her with her own eyes. You look like you haven't slept, Mabel said, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. I slept some. Lies don't count as conversation in my diner. Annie picked up the fork. I closed my eyes for a while. That's closer. Grace had not liked the idea of Annie leaving the apartment, but Detective Bennett had arranged for a patrol car to pass the block twice, and Samuel had insisted on driving both Annie and Grace to the diner himself. Grace was in the booth beside Annie, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, looking around as if she might personally identify every threat in Chicago by posture alone. Mabel slid into the opposite side of the booth. I talked to Mr. Reed. I know. He has good manners. Grace took a sip of tea. So do funeral directors. Mabel nodded. True. Annie almost smiled. Mabel leaned in. I'm not asking you to work, but if you want to sit here a while, you sit. Nobody bothers you in my place unless I allow it. Miss Mabel, I don't want you losing customers over me. Annie, most of my customers are old men who order 1 coffee and 3 refills. I will survive the financial storm. A bell over the front door rang. Annie stiffened before she could stop herself. It was only Mr. Peterson, the retired mailman, shaking rain from his cap. He saw her and raised a hand. There she is. You been hiding, young lady? Annie forced her voice to behave. No, sir. He came closer, squinting. You all right? She's eating, Mabel said. That's what she's doing. Mr. Peterson looked from Mabel to Grace to Annie and understood enough not to ask loudly. Old people often knew when a room had a bruise. He lowered his voice. World giving you trouble? Annie looked down at her plate. A little. He nodded once. World does that. Don't mean it owns you. Then he shuffled to his usual booth. The words should have been too simple to matter, but they did. Annie cut into the eggs and took a bite. They tasted like butter and pepper and somebody trying to keep her alive in a different way than she had kept Arthur alive. Grace's phone buzzed. She checked it, then handed it to Annie. Samuel had sent a message. Mr. Whitmore is awake and asking after you. He will not contact you directly unless you agree. He wants you to know he believes you." Annie read the last sentence twice. He believes you. Not he thanks you. Not he will pay you. Not he regrets the misunderstanding. He believes you. Grace watched her face. What did he say? Annie handed her the phone. Grace read it and grew quiet. Mabel pretended to wipe the table, though it was already clean. "Well?" Annie folded her hands in her lap. "He says he believes me." Mabel stopped wiping. Grace looked at the window. For a moment, none of them spoke. There were things older women knew too well to interrupt. Sometimes being believed did not fix the wound. Sometimes it only proved how long you had been bleeding. Annie looked toward Mr. Peterson's booth, then toward the counter where coffee steamed in glass pots. "Why does that make me want to cry?" Grace's voice was gentle. "Because you were holding it together before." Annie blinked fast and looked down at her plate again. The bell over the door rang a second time. This time it was a man Annie did not know. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He did not look around like someone searching for a table. He looked around like someone checking exits. His eyes passed over Mr. Peterson, Mabel, Grace, then stopped on Annie. Grace noticed. So did Mabel. The man walked to the counter. "Coffee to go." Mabel moved behind the register. "Small or large?" "Large." His voice was flat. He placed a $5 bill on the counter but kept looking toward the booth. Annie's fork slipped softly against the plate. Grace put one hand on Annie's knee under the table. "Stay still." Mabel poured the coffee slowly. Too slowly. "Cream?" "No." "Sugar?" "No." "You sure? You look like you could use something sweet." The man's gaze cut to her. Mabel smiled without warmth and set the lid on the cup. 5 even. He took the coffee but did not leave right away. Instead, he turned slightly and spoke toward Annie's booth. "You Annie Carter?" The diner went quiet in the way small places can, where every old man and every spoon seems to hear. Grace answered before Annie could. "Who's asking?" The man smiled. "Just somebody passing along advice." Mabel reached under the counter. Annie knew there was no gun there. Probably a rolling pin. Maybe the old wooden bat Mabel kept near the mop sink. Somehow that comforted her more. The man looked at Annie. "Stay away from things that don't concern you." Mr. Peterson stood up from his booth. Slowly, but he stood. Mabel's voice dropped. "You need to leave." The man took one step toward Annie. Then the front door opened again, and Detective Bennett walked in with 2 uniformed officers behind her. She looked at the man with no surprise at all. "Coffee must be good here." "You came a long way for it, Ray." The man's face changed. Annie's pulse pounded in her ears. Bennett stepped closer. "Ray Collins, you have 2 choices. You can walk outside with me and talk like a grown man. Or you can make these officers ruin Mrs. Dawson's floor with your poor decision." Mabel said, "I just mopped." Ray looked toward the back door. One of the officers had already moved that way. He set the coffee down. "I didn't do anything." Bennett smiled slightly. "Then you'll have a short conversation," as they escorted him out. Ray looked back once at Annie. Not with power now. With irritation. Like she had become more trouble than he expected. The door closed behind them. For a second, nobody moved. Then Mr. Peterson sat down with a groan. "Haven't stood that fast since 1998. Mabel exhaled. "You did not stand fast." "I stood with intent." Annie gave a shaky laugh, then covered her mouth as tears came with it. Grace pulled her close, right there in the booth. Mabel came around and stood beside them. That's enough diner excitement for one day. Through the window, Annie saw Detective Bennett speaking to Ray near the unmarked car. Samuel's black sedan was parked across the street. He stood beside it, watching without interfering. Annie understood then that the next right thing had become bigger than telling the truth. It meant surviving long enough for the truth to be heard. She wiped her face and sat up. Grace brushed hair from her cheek. "You okay?" "No," Annie said. Then she looked out at Ray Collins, at the officers, at Samuel, at the gray Chicago afternoon that seemed to be holding its breath. "But I'm not going to disappear." Detective Bennett did not question Ray Collins inside the diner. She knew better than to give a man like him an audience. She walked him to the unmarked car. Let the uniformed officers stand close enough to make running foolish. and waited until he had spent a full minute pretending not to be nervous. "You're far from your usual neighborhood," she said. Ray looked past her toward the diner window. "I wanted coffee. You passed 12 places that sell coffee. Maybe I like this one. You ordered it black and left it on the counter. I changed my mind." Bennett nodded as if that were reasonable. "And asking for Annie Carter by name?" Ray shrugged. "Friend of a friend. Name the friend." He smiled a little. "Don't remember." Bennett looked at the uniformed officer beside him. Amazing how memory goes bad right before handcuffs. Ray's smile faded. "Am I under arrest?" "For now, you're being detained while I decide how stupid you want to be. You can't detain me for buying coffee." "No. But I can detain you for matching a suspect description in an intimidation complaint, approaching a protected witness in an ongoing investigation, and carrying what I'm guessing is not a church bulletin in your jacket pocket." Ray's eyes shifted. Bennett held out her hand. "Let's not make this dramatic." One officer patted him down and removed a folded paper from inside his jacket. Bennett opened it. Annie's name. Her address. Mabel's Diner. Grace Carter's name written underneath. No signature, but Ray's face told her enough. "Still coffee?" she asked. Ray said nothing. Across the street, Samuel watched from beside his sedan. He did not interfere. That had been Bennett's instruction, and Samuel respected instructions when they were competent. Still, his eyes moved between Ray, the diner, and the vehicles passing too slowly along the curb. He had spent the morning helping arrange a quiet safety net around Annie. But quiet nets had holes. People with money found holes. Bennett walked over after Ray was placed in the back of the squad car. "He won't give Daniel up yet," she said. Samuel glanced at the car. "But he will? Men like that usually love money until prison becomes part of the math. Can you hold him? Not long on this alone, but long enough to make him uncomfortable. Search his phone with consent if he gets nervous. Maybe connect him to the text if he was careless." Was he? Most people are. They just aren't careless where they think they are. Samuel looked toward the diner window. Annie was still in the booth with Grace, Mabel standing guard nearby. "She should not stay here." "No," Bennett said, "but she also can't be made to feel like a prisoner. That's how scared witnesses stop cooperating. She is not a witness to him. She is a child." Bennett looked at him. "She is both. That's the problem." Inside the diner, Annie held a napkin in both hands until it tore down the middle. Grace took the pieces away gently. "Your hands need something better to do than punish paper." "I'm okay. Try again." Annie looked toward the window. Ray was in the back of the police car now. He was not so large through glass. Just a man with a bent head and too much confidence leaking out of him. "He knew my name," Annie said. Mabel refilled Grace's tea, though nobody had asked. "Cowards like names. Makes them feel powerful." Mr. Peterson came over with his cap in his hands. "Miss Grace, you need a ride home. I can call my nephew. He drives one of those rideshare things. Good boy. Talks too much, but good boy." Grace gave him a tired smile. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. We have a ride." He nodded, then turned to Annie. "Young lady, I delivered mail in this city 32 years. You learned something doing that." Annie wiped under one eye. "What's that?" "Bad news loves a mailbox, but good people know how to knock on the door." He looked at Mabel, then Grace, then out at Samuel. "You got some knocking today." Annie did not know what to say, so she only nodded. A minute later, Detective Bennett came in. Conversations dropped again. Bennett noticed and raised one hand. "Everybody can breathe. He's leaving with us." Mabel leaned on the counter. "You got what you need?" "Some, not all." "That sounds like police talk for no." "It's police talk for keep the coffee warm." Bennett came to the booth and sat without asking for anything to drink. "Annie, I need to tell you what happens next. Ray Collins will be questioned. We found your information on him. That helps, but it doesn't end this." Grace's fingers tightened around her mug. "Meaning Daniel can send someone else. Meaning we act like he might." Annie's voice was quiet. "Do I have to hide?" "No. But you need to be smart. Work, school applications, errands, all of that gets coordinated for a few days. If you go somewhere, Somebody knows. If a strange number calls, you do not answer. If anyone speaks to you about Arthur Whitmore, you walk toward people, lights, cameras, and you call me. Annie looked down. This is my life now? For a little while, Bennett said. Not forever. How do you know? I don't. But I know men like Daniel Whitmore don't like pressure. He thought he could scare you quietly. Quiet is gone. Samuel entered then, folding his umbrella though it had stopped raining. He came to the booth but did not sit. Miss Carter, he said. Mr. Whitmore would like to know if you are safe. May I tell him you are? Annie looked at Grace first. Grace gave a small nod, leaving the choice to her. Yes, Annie said. You can tell him. Samuel's shoulders lowered by the smallest amount. Thank you. Bennett stood. I need to speak with Mr. Whitmore too. Samuel nodded. He is still at the hospital. For now? For now. Bennett caught the wording. He's planning something. Mr. Whitmore is always planning something. That's not an answer. It is the safest one I have. Bennett gave him a look that would have made a less disciplined man explain himself. Samuel did not. At the hospital, Arthur had already decided he was leaving before Samuel returned. Dr. Patel stood beside the bed with his arms folded. No, Arthur was sitting upright, pale but dressed in trousers and a white shirt Samuel had brought earlier. The shirt hung looser than usual. Illness had a way of making expensive fabric look borrowed. I am not asking to run a marathon, Arthur said. You are asking to leave a monitored cardiac unit less than 48 hours after a major event. I will leave with medical supervision. You will leave over my objection. With your objection documented, if that comforts you. Dr. Patel stared at him. You are a difficult patient. I have been told I am a difficult man generally. That was not a compliment. I did not receive it as one. Samuel entered in time to hear the last exchange. Arthur looked past Dr. Patel. Is she safe? For the moment. Ray Collins approached her at the diner. Detective Bennett intervened. He had Annie's information on him. Arthur's face went still. Dr. Patel pointed at the heart monitor. This is exactly why I said no. Arthur swung his legs slowly over the side of the bed. The movement cost him. He waited until the dizziness passed, one hand gripping the rail. Samuel moved closer. Sit back. No. Arthur. No, he repeated. But the second time it was not anger. It was grief sharpened into purpose. I lay in this bed while she was threatened under her own roof, then followed to a diner. She saved my life. My family put a target on hers. I will not hide behind hospital glass. Dr. Patel stepped in front of him. And if you collapse in front of her, what does that do to this young woman you claim to be protecting? Arthur's expression faltered. The doctor pressed on. You want to help her? Stay alive. Think clearly. Let the detective build the case. Detective Bennett entered the room without knocking twice. That may be the first medical advice in history that also counts as police strategy. Arthur looked at her. Detective, Mr. Whitmore, sit down before I decide rich men are more fragile than they look. Samuel's mouth twitched. Arthur sat, though not because he was told to. At least that was how he would remember it. Bennett came closer. Ray Collins had Annie Carter's name, address, workplace, and her mother's name. He is connected to another man, Victor Hale. Both have done intimidation work before. Neither has an obvious reason to care about you unless someone paid them. Daniel. Likely Daniel. I need more than likely. I need communication, money, a witness, something that doesn't evaporate when a defense attorney walks in. Arthur looked at Samuel. Payment records? Possible. Daniel would not use direct accounts. No, Arthur said. But he is arrogant when he feels rushed. Bennett watched him. Can you help me find the rush? Arthur nodded slowly. My will. Samuel understood first. If Daniel believes you are moving forward with the revised estate documents immediately, he may panic. He already tried to scare Annie, Arthur said. Now he needs to know she is not silent, and I am not dead. Dr. Patel said, You are not holding a boardroom trap from a hospital bed. Arthur looked at Bennett. Can I hold it from a legally supervised location with a doctor nearby? No, Dr. Patel said. Bennett tilted her head. Maybe. Dr. Patel turned to her. Detective. I said maybe. I didn't say today. Arthur's eyes sharpened. Tomorrow. Dr. Patel rubbed the bridge of his nose. I hate all of you, Samuel said. Understandable. Bennett pointed at Arthur. Here is how this works. You do nothing without me knowing. No private confrontation. No family meeting that turns into theater. You preserve evidence, you let us monitor communications, and you let Daniel make mistakes. Arthur nodded. Agreed. And Annie? Arthur's voice changed. She stays protected. She stays informed, Bennett corrected. Protection without consent is just another kind of control. Arthur took that in. It was not a sentence Daniel would have understood. It was not one Arthur himself would have understood a week ago. You're right, he said. Bennett seemed almost surprised, then hid it. Good. That saves time. Samuel's phone buzzed. He checked the screen. What is it? Arthur asked. Daniel has requested a family meeting. Tonight. He says there are urgent concerns about your competency and the future of the company. Arthur leaned back, and for the first time since waking, there was something like cold satisfaction in his eyes. There's the rush, he said. Bennett looked at the message, then at Arthur. Do not answer yet. Arthur held out his hand for the phone. Samuel did not give it to him. Arthur looked offended. Again? Doctor's orders, Samuel said. Dr. Patel sighed. That is not exactly what I meant. But I'll take it. Bennett moved toward the door. I'll get a warrant started for Ray's phone and financials. Mr. Reed, preserve that message. Mr. Whitmore, stay in that bed. Arthur watched them all as if they were a board voting against him. Then he looked toward the window. Somewhere beyond the hospital, beyond the glass towers and wet streets, Annie Carter was being asked to be brave because his blood had become dangerous. He spoke quietly, but every person in the room heard him. Tell Daniel, I'll see him soon. Bennett stopped at the door. Not too soon. Arthur did not smile. Soon enough, he said. Arthur did not answer Daniel's message that night. That bothered Daniel more than a refusal would have. He stood in the private study of his apartment near the river, phone in hand, city lights pressing against the windows behind him. The room was built to look calm. Walnut shelves, leather chairs, framed photographs of charity dinners, a bottle of scotch on a side table. Nothing in it showed the calls he had made, the money he had moved, or the way his uncle had looked at him from the hospital bed, as if a curtain had been pulled back. Margaret sat on the sofa, one leg crossed over the other, tapping a manicured nail against her glass. He's punishing us, she said. Daniel looked at his phone again. Still no reply. Arthur doesn't punish. He calculates. Then calculate faster. If he signs those documents, we lose control. We don't know what he remembers. Margaret's face tightened. That girl told him something. That girl heard something. There's a difference. She was at the hospital. She spoke to us. She knows your face. Daniel turned on her. She knows I was worried about my uncle. Margaret gave him a look. They both knew better. Daniel poured himself a drink and did not take it. The sight of the glass irritated him now. One careless detail. One private meeting. One old man too stubborn to die. That was how fortunes slipped. His phone buzzed. Not Arthur. Victor Hale. Ray got picked up. Diner. Cops were waiting. Daniel read it twice. Margaret stood. What? Ray got sloppy. Did he talk? Not yet. Not yet is not comfort. Daniel typed back with his thumb. Where are you? Victor's answer came quickly. Away. Not going near that girl now. Daniel smiled without humor. Men like Victor were useful only until fear taught them math. He called instead of texting. Victor answered on the fourth ring. I told you. I'm out. You're out when I say you are. No. Ray's in a police car because you said this was a scare job. Now cops are there before he orders coffee. That girl's protected. Not all the time. Victor breathed into the phone. You didn't say police were involved. I'm saying it now. Which means you need to finish what Ray started before he trades your name for a lighter charge. There was silence. Daniel lowered his voice. I don't need her hurt. I need her gone. Scared enough to leave town, refuse calls, stop being useful. Can you do that? Or should I assume Ray was the professional one? Victor hated being compared. Daniel knew that. I'll talk to her, Victor said. No diner, no apartment. Too visible. She works nights, right? Not today, maybe tomorrow. I'll find a place. Make it clean. Victor laughed once, dry and short. Nothing's clean anymore. After Daniel hung up, Margaret stared at him. If this gets worse, it won't. You keep saying that, because panic is expensive. Margaret walked to the window. You should have let Arthur change the will. We could have fought it later. Daniel finally drank. You never understood him. Once Arthur moves money into a foundation, he wraps it in lawyers, trustees, public reputation, moral language. You can't claw that back without looking like you're stealing from sick children and poor students. And now we make sure the only witness looks unreliable. She is 18. She is poor, scared, and already accused. That is more useful than her age. Margaret looked at him then, not with shock, but with the discomfort of hearing aloud what she preferred to think quietly. Across town the next afternoon, Annie tried to return to something that looked like normal. It was Grace who insisted on fresh air first. She said if they stayed behind the locked door another full day, fear would start charging rent. Detective Bennett agreed Annie could go to Mabel's for a short shift if she wanted, provided the route was known, the time was known, and someone drove her. Samuel brought them in his sedan. He did not ask if they had slept. He did not tell Annie she was brave. She was grateful for both. You don't have to do this, Grace said as they pulled up behind the diner. I know. Knowing and believing are cousins, not twins. Annie looked at her mother. You want me to stay home? I want you safe. I also want you not to feel chased out of your own life. Samuel parked near the back entrance. I'll be nearby. Annie frowned. Nearby where? In the least intrusive place I can find. That sounds like something from a spy movie. I have been called less flattering things. Grace touched Annie's wrist. Call when you're done, not when you're on the way, before you step out. Yes, ma'am. Inside, Mabel greeted Annie with an apron and a look that said she had been worried and would deny it under oath. You're on counter only, Mabel said. No back alley trash runs. No closing alone. No arguing. That's a lot of rules. I'm old. Rules are one of the last pleasures left. The shift was slow. Annie poured coffee, brought out pie, rang up 2 truck drivers and a woman with 3 children who spilled orange juice under the table. Ordinary work steadied her hands. She liked useful things. Wiping a counter, stacking plates, refilling sugar jars. They did not ask what she had witnessed. They did not look at her like Daniel had. Near 7, rain began again. Not heavy, just enough to streak the windows and make the streetlights glow. Annie checked her phone. No unknown calls. No new messages. Grace had texted a heart and a command. Eat something. Mabel pushed a plate toward her during a lull. Grilled cheese, don't negotiate. Annie took a bite. You and my mama have started a committee. We elected ourselves. At 8:30, Samuel texted. Still outside. No concern at present. Annie showed Mabel. Mabel nodded. Good. Finish at 9. I'll walk you out. At 8:47, the diner phone rang. Mabel answered. Mabel's? Her face shifted. Yes, she's here. Who's calling? Annie looked up. Mabel covered the receiver. It's your mama. Says her phone died and she needs you to pick up medicine from King's Pharmacy before it closes. Annie reached for her own phone. She would text Samuel. She says she tried. Bad connection. A small warning moved through Annie, but worry moved faster. Grace's medicine mattered. Missing a dose could mean a headache, dizziness, a night of blood pressure numbers that made Annie sit awake with one hand on the phone. She took the receiver. Mama? A woman's voice answered, low and strained. Annie, baby, can you hear me? It sounded like Grace, or enough like Grace through static and diner noise. Mama, what's wrong? I need the pressure pills. Pharmacy closes soon. Please hurry. Where's your phone? Dead. I'm calling from Mrs. Hill downstairs. Baby, hurry. The line clicked. Mabel was already frowning. I don't like it. Me neither. Annie dialed Grace's number. It went straight to voicemail. She called Samuel. No answer. That was strange. Samuel always answered. She texted him. Did my mom call you? Pharmacy? No response. Mabel reached for her coat. I'll drive you. You don't drive at night. I drive when I'm angry. Annie almost said yes. Then the back door opened, and the dishwasher called out that the kitchen sink had overflowed. Water was spreading fast across the tile. Mabel cursed and hurried back. "Wait 5 minutes," she said. Annie looked at the clock. King's Pharmacy closed at 9. It was 6 blocks away, maybe 7. The main street was lit. She had walked it before. She told herself, this was not the alley. This was not midnight. This was not being reckless. This was her mother. She grabbed her coat. Mabel saw her moving. "Annie, I'll stay on the main road. I'll call from there." "Annie, don't you dare." But Annie was already out the front door, phone in hand, rain dotting the screen. She walked fast, staying near storefronts, passing a laundromat, a barber shop with its chairs turned upside down, a church sign that read "God sees what men hide." Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. She stopped under the awning of a closed bakery. The text read, "Good girl. Keep walking." Annie's blood went cold. She turned at once to go back. A man stepped out from the mouth of the narrow side street behind her. Victor Hale. She knew it before he spoke, though she had never seen him up close. There was a calmness to him that felt practiced. "Don't run," he said. Annie backed toward the main sidewalk. "Stay away from me. I just want to talk." "No, you don't." He lifted both hands slightly. "Smart girl. That'll help." Annie looked left. A couple crossed the street half a block away. Heads bent under an umbrella. Too far. The bakery behind her was dark. Traffic hissed past, but no one was looking. Her phone shook in her hand. She tried to dial 911 without taking her eyes off him. Victor noticed. "I wouldn't." She pressed the button anyway. He moved faster than she expected, grabbing her wrist. Annie twisted, and her phone slipped, hitting the wet pavement. The emergency call screen glowed up at them. Victor kicked the phone toward the curb. "Help!" Annie shouted. "Somebody help me!" He clamped a hand around her arm, not over her mouth. Not yet. He was trying to keep it looking like an argument, not an attack. "Lower your voice," he said. "You lower yours." He dragged her a few steps into the side street. Annie fought him. Heels scraping, shoulder burning. Her purse swung hard against his ribs, and he swore. "You need to listen," Victor snapped. "Forget Arthur Whitmore. Forget what he said. Forget his family. You get on a bus. Go visit an aunt, cousin, whoever. You don't answer calls. You don't talk to cops." "I already did." His grip tightened. "Then stop." Rain ran down Annie's face. Her fear was huge, but under it came anger, hot and clear. He was dying. "I helped him. That's all." Victor leaned close. "Girls like you don't survive by helping men like him." The words hit almost exactly where Daniel's family had struck her before. "Girls like you. Men like him." As if the world came labeled, and she had wandered off her assigned shelf. Annie yanked against him. "You don't get to tell me where I belong." Victor's face hardened. "No, but I can teach you what happens when you forget." He shoved her, and her purse tore open. The small tin box she had started carrying after the note, because she no longer wanted to leave her dream under a bed where strangers might find it, fell onto the wet pavement. The lid popped loose. Coins scattered. Folded bills slid into the rain. Her college papers, softened at the edges from years of handling, spread across the ground. Victor looked down, then laughed. "College fund?" He picked up the lid and read the tape. "You serious?" Annie lunged for it. "Don't touch that." He held it just out of reach. "College. Girls like you should learn where they belong." Something in Annie broke open, but it was not surrender. She slapped him. The sound cracked through the rain. Victor stared at her, stunned for half a second. Then his hand rose. Before it came down, headlights flooded the side street. A car stopped hard at the curb, another behind it. Then blue lights flashed, sudden and bright against the brick walls. "Police!" Detective Bennett's voice cut through the rain. "Step away from her." Victor turned, still gripping Annie's arm. A black sedan pulled up behind the unmarked police car. Samuel got out first, pale with anger. Then, against every medical order and every reasonable plan, Arthur Whitmore stepped out of the back seat, one hand braced on the open door, a dark coat over his shoulders. He looked weak. He looked furious. "Take your hands off the young woman who saved my life," Arthur said. Victor let go. not because he had grown decent, but because the night had filled with witnesses. Annie stumbled back, breathing hard. Bennett moved between them while two officers seized Victor and pushed him against the wall. Samuel reached Annie but stopped short of touching her. "Miss Carter?" Annie could not answer. She dropped to her knees and began gathering wet dollar bills from the pavement with shaking hands. Arthur saw the tin box, the coins in the gutter, the college papers bleeding ink in the rain. Something in his face changed. He bent slowly, pain tightening his mouth, and picked up one soaked $5 bill before it could wash away. Annie looked up at him then. For a second, they were back in another wet place, another narrow strip of city, one of them on the ground and the other trying to keep a life from slipping away. Arthur held out the bill. "I am sorry," he said, voice rough, "for all of it." Annie took the money from his hand. Behind them, Victor shouted that he had done nothing. Bennett ignored him and read him his rights. Samuel picked up the lid of the tin box and placed it carefully beside Annie's papers. Arthur stayed, standing only because pride and grief were holding him upright. Annie looked at him, rain and tears mixed on her face. "Why won't they leave me alone?" she asked. Arthur's answer came quietly. "Because they are afraid you know the truth." Victor Hale stopped shouting once Detective Bennett opened the trunk of the unmarked car and took out an evidence bag. The rain kept falling, soft but steady, turning the side street into a strip of black glass. Red and blue lights moved across the brick walls, across Arthur's pale face, across Annie's wet college papers spread on the ground like something wounded. Bennett crouched near Annie's phone first. "Nobody touch it." "I tried to call," Annie said. Her voice sounded thin to her own ears. "I know." Bennett looked at the screen, then at Victor. "That helps." Victor twisted against the officer holding him. "She dropped it. I didn't do anything." "You kicked it," Annie said. He looked at her with a warning in his eyes. Arthur stepped half a pace forward. It was not much, but Samuel noticed and moved closer in case his legs failed him. Victor saw Arthur too. "You don't even know what happened." "I was trying to help her." Arthur's face did not change. "You have an odd way of helping." Bennett stood. "Mr. Hale, I'm going to save you some energy. We have surveillance from the bakery awning, a partial audio feed from the patrol unit, and a witness who heard her yell for help. Also, Mr. Reed's vehicle camera picked up enough. You can keep talking, but every sentence is just you donating rope." Victor's mouth closed. Annie looked at Samuel. "You were following me?" Samuel held her torn purse in both hands, careful not to spill anything else from it. "After you left the diner, Miss Dawson called me. I called Detective Bennett. We were not close enough to stop the first minute. I am sorry for that." "You called him?" Annie asked Mabel, who had arrived breathless under a plastic rain poncho, one shoe untied, fury making her look 10 years younger. Mabel pointed at her. "Do not start with me, child. You walked out after I said wait. I have known you since you were 15. And you still think being scared means you get to be stubborn without witnesses." Grace arrived next in Mr. Peterson's nephew's rideshare, stepping out before the car had fully settled against the curb. She wore no coat, only the sweater she had grabbed on the way out, and her face was the color of fear. Annie rose, but Grace reached her first and pulled her into her arms so hard Annie could barely breathe. "I'm okay," Annie said, though the words shook. Grace held her away by both shoulders and looked at her face, her arms, her clothes. "Do not lie to your mother in the rain." "I'm not hurt bad." "That is not the same as okay," Mabel muttered. "That's what I keep telling her." Arthur stood several feet away, watching Grace hold her daughter. Something passed over his face that Annie could not read. Shame, maybe, or recognition. He had been surrounded by relatives all his life and could not remember the last time someone had reached for him like that without wanting something after. Grace saw him then. For a moment, she only stared. This was the man her daughter had saved, the man whose family had dragged danger into their home, the man standing in the rain, when he should have been in a hospital bed. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Mrs. Carter." His voice was formal, but there was no distance in it. Grace's eyes moved over his coat, his gray face, the hand he kept pressed near his ribs. "You look like you ought to be lying down." "I have been told that." "By people smarter than you?" "Yes, ma'am." Then maybe listen. Samuel lowered his eyes briefly. It might have been respect. It might have been relief that someone else had said it. Arthur took a breath, and Annie saw pain cross his face before he controlled it. Mrs. Carter, your daughter came to me when I was dying. My family repaid her with suspicion. Now she has been threatened because of me. I have no excuse. Grace held Annie's hand tighter. I don't need your excuse. No, I need to know whether this ends. Arthur looked toward Victor, now being guided into the police car. It begins to end tonight. Bennett came back with Annie's phone sealed in a bag. We need statements. Not here. Miss Carter, you and your mother can ride with me if you're comfortable. Mr. Whitmore, you are going back to the hospital. Arthur looked like he might argue. Bennett raised a hand. Try me. He did not. At the station, the fluorescent lights were harsh, but the room was dry. Annie sat beside Grace in a small interview room with a paper cup of water she had not touched. Mabel waited in the lobby, refusing to leave until she saw Annie walk out. Samuel stayed in the hall with Arthur, who had finally accepted a chair after Dr. Patel called Bennett and threatened, loud enough over speakerphone, to have him readmitted by force. Detective Bennett recorded Annie's statement. She did not rush her. She asked what happened after Annie left the diner, what the phone call sounded like, where Victor grabbed her, what he said about Arthur, what he said about leaving town. When Annie described the tin box falling, her voice broke. Bennett paused the questions. Do you need a minute? Annie shook her head. If I stop, I might not start again. Grace rubbed her back once, then let her sit upright. Annie appreciated that. Comfort was good, but so was being allowed to finish. He said girls like me should learn where we belong, Annie said. Bennett's pen stopped. Exact words? Yes. And what did you say? Annie looked at the table. I said he doesn't get to tell me where I belong. Bennett wrote that down too. When they finished, Bennett turned off the recorder. You did well. I don't feel like I did. Most people don't. Grace looked at the detective. Will he talk? Victor? Maybe. Ray is already nervous. Now Victor has more charges and less reason to stay loyal. Men like Daniel Whitmore hire people who are loyal to cash. Cash doesn't visit jail. Annie leaned back. The room smelled like old coffee and copier toner. She had never been inside a police station except once on a school field trip when an officer talked about bicycle safety. This was different. This was the part of justice that did not look like speeches, only forms, timestamps, tired people asking careful questions. A knock came. Bennett opened the door. Samuel stood there with the repaired contents of Annie's purse in a clear plastic tote. Her tin box sat on top, wiped dry as much as possible. The masking tape label had wrinkled, but the words were still readable. College fund. I believe these are yours, Samuel said. Annie reached for the box with both hands. Thank you. Some of the papers are damaged. I'm sorry. They were old copies. Grace looked at him. Where is Arthur? In the hallway, pretending not to need medical attention. Bennett sighed. Of course he is. Annie looked toward the door. Can I talk to him? Grace turned to her. You don't have to. I know. Samuel stepped aside. Arthur was sitting on a bench near the vending machines, coat open, one hand resting near his chest. Under the police station lights, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who had learned too late that money could buy privacy but not peace. He tried to stand when he saw Annie. Please don't, she said. He stopped halfway, then sat back down with visible frustration. I am not usually this poor, at basic courtesy. You almost fell over. That too. Annie sat at the other end of the bench. Grace remained standing close enough to hear. Samuel gave them space, but not distance. Arthur looked at the tin box in Annie's lap. May I ask what you are studying? I'm not studying yet. What would you study? Nursing. He nodded slowly. Of course. Annie almost smiled. Why, of course? Because when everyone else saw a problem in an alley, you saw a patient. She looked down. I didn't think about it that way. No, that is probably why it was real. For a moment, neither of them spoke. A vending machine hummed beside them. Somewhere down the hall, a printer jammed and someone cursed softly. Annie traced the wet edge of the tape on her tin. Your nephew did this? Arthur did not hide from the question. Yes. I believe so. Because of money? Yes. And because you were changing your will? His eyes moved to her face. Samuel told you? He said enough. Arthur nodded. I was planning to move much of my estate into education and medical grants. My family did not approve, so they tried to kill you. The sentence sat there, plain and awful. Arthur looked older when he answered, yes. Annie's hands tightened around the box. At the hospital, Daniel looked me in the face and acted like I was the dangerous one. I know. No, she said, and her voice sharpened before she could soften it. You know now. I had to know then. Arthur accepted that. No defense, no correction. You are right, he said. I know now. You carried it then. That almost undid her. She looked away fast. Arthur lowered his voice. Miss Carter, I cannot undo what my family said to you. I cannot undo tonight. But I can make sure Daniel does not hide behind the Whitmore name. How? By giving Detective Bennett everything. Records, accounts, messages, access logs, and by making him believe he still has a chance to talk his way out. Annie looked back at him. That sounds dangerous. It is less dangerous than silence. Grace, from behind them, said, silence is what people with power ask for when truth gets expensive. Arthur turned slightly to her. Mrs. Carter, I am learning that. Learn fast. Yes, ma'am. Bennett came down the hall with a folder in hand. Victor Hale is asking what kind of deal Ray Collins is getting. Arthur's eyes sharpened. Samuel said, Ray has not been offered one. No, Bennett said, but Victor doesn't know that. And he has a phone with Daniel's encrypted messages he suddenly remembers how to unlock. Grace whispered, thank God. Bennett looked at Arthur. We may have enough to connect Daniel to the intimidation. The poisoning is still the larger piece. Arthur said, then use me. No. I can draw him out. No, Bennett repeated. You can assist under controlled conditions. You are not bait. Arthur said nothing. Bennett looked at Annie. And you are not bait either. I want that clear. Annie nodded. Arthur looked at her too. Agreed. The fact that he said it mattered. Men like Daniel would have used her fear. Arthur, at least in that moment, seemed to understand that helping her meant not owning her. Bennett closed the folder. Here's what happens now. Mr. Whitmore, your staff will send Daniel a controlled message. He'll be told you're willing to discuss the estate issue and the family's concerns. We monitor what follows. If he reaches out to Victor or Ray, we'll know. If he moves money, we'll know. If he tries to run, we'll know. Samuel nodded. I can prepare the wording. Arthur looked at Annie. I am sorry this has not ended tonight. Annie held the tin box against her chest. I didn't think justice worked that fast. No, Grace said quietly. Justice is not fast, but tonight, at least, it knows our address. Bennett's phone buzzed. She checked it, then gave the smallest smile Annie had seen from her. Victor just gave up the name of the man who paid him, she said. Arthur closed his eyes once. Daniel? Samuel asked. Bennett looked at them all. Daniel Whitmore, she said, and he wants to talk before Ray does. Daniel Whitmore did not go to the police station when he learned Victor Hale had started talking. He went to his office. That was the first mistake Detective Bennett expected him to make. Men like Daniel did not run to airports right away. They ran first to files, accounts, phones, passwords, anything that could still be cleaned before the walls moved in. He arrived at Whitmore Capital just after dawn, walking through the private entrance with his coat collar up and his phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what Victor says, he told Margaret. He's a hired thug trying to save himself. Margaret's voice was thin. And Ray? Same. They both know your name. They know what they were paid to know. That's not proof of poisoning. Daniel stepped into the executive elevator and used his access card. The doors closed around him in polished steel. For 1 second, his reflection looked back at him from all sides. Perfect suit, controlled face, tired eyes. He hated the tiredness. It made him look guilty. Margaret said, Arthur is going to destroy us. No, Daniel said. Arthur is weak, emotional, and surrounded by people who want to feel noble. That makes him predictable. You said that before he woke up. Daniel ended the call. The elevator opened onto the executive floor. It was quiet, the way money liked to wake before ordinary people arrived. The reception desk was empty. The glass walls of the conference rooms reflected the first gray light of morning. He walked straight to the private family conference room. The room had been cleaned since that night, but Daniel still saw it as it had been. Arthur at the head of the table, Margaret stiff beside him, the cousins pretending not to watch the fight, the glass near Arthur's hand, one old man, one revised will, one sentimental plan to send Whitmore money into scholarships and clinics instead of keeping it where it belonged. Daniel opened a cabinet beneath the sideboard and removed a small black device no larger than a thumb drive. It had been connected to the backup audio system, the one he had forgotten in the rush after Arthur collapsed. He had disabled the cameras, paid Marcus Vale, sent the staff away, managed the glass. But the backup recorder had been part of an older security upgrade Samuel had insisted on years ago, after a contractor dispute. Samuel Reed. Daniel's mouth tightened. He slipped the device into his coat pocket and turned toward the door. Samuel stood there. He was not alone. Detective Bennett stood beside him, hands relaxed, badge visible. Two uniformed officers waited farther down the hall. Daniel stopped, then smiled like a man greeting a dull inconvenience. Samuel, detective, this is early. Bennett looked at the pocket where the device had gone. So are you. I work here. So I've heard. Daniel's eyes moved to Samuel. You brought police into a private office? Samuel's voice stayed even. Mr. Whitmore authorized access. My uncle is under medical distress. He was when you tried to have him declared incompetent last night. This morning, he is alert enough to sign a preservation order. Daniel's smile thinned. You always did enjoy paperwork. It has its uses. Bennett stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, we have a warrant covering electronic records, internal security devices, access logs, and any materials related to the family meeting held the night Arthur Whitmore was poisoned. Poisoned? Daniel repeated the word with mild amusement. That's a serious accusation. Yes. I assume Victor Hale is telling stories. He is telling his version. Ray Collins is telling his. Your phone records are beginning to tell theirs. Daniel glanced toward the officers. Am I under arrest? Not yet. Then I'd like my attorney. Good idea, Bennett said. You can call him after you hand over what you just put in your pocket. Daniel held her gaze. For a moment, the clean hallway seemed to shrink. Samuel watched Daniel calculate. Deny. Surrender. Run. Charm. None of the choices fit the suit he was wearing. Finally, Daniel reached into his pocket and took out the device. This, he said, company property. I noticed it was loose. Bennett took it with a gloved hand and placed it in an evidence bag. Helpful of you. Itre. No, Samuel said quietly. You don't. Daniel looked at him then, and for the first time, the mask slipped. You should remember who gave you a career. Samuel did not flinch. Arthur gave me employment. You gave me reason to stay alert. Bennett turned to the officers. Escort Mr. Whitmore downstairs. He's not leaving the building until we finish. Daniel laughed once. That isn't how this works. Bennett looked back at him. It is this morning. While Daniel called his attorney from a glass-walled conference room under police watch, Arthur sat in a secure meeting room at the hospital, dressed again against Dr. Patel's advice. The doctor had allowed one concession. Arthur could sit at a table for 30 minutes if a nurse remained nearby, and his heart monitor stayed connected. Arthur considered it humiliating. Dr. Patel considered it generous. You have 24 minutes left, the doctor said. Arthur ignored him and looked at the screen where Samuel's video call waited to connect. Grace and Annie sat across from him. Annie held her tin box in her lap, not because she needed it, but because letting it out of her sight had become difficult. Arthur noticed but did not mention it. Grace did. Baby, you can set that down. I know. You're holding it like it might run away. Annie looked at the box, then placed it on the table. Her fingers stayed near the lid. Arthur said, I'm sorry about the papers. Annie gave him a small, tired look. You apologize a lot. I have a backlog. Grace made a sound that might have been approval, though not much of one. Detective Bennett appeared on the video call a moment later, standing in what looked like an office corridor. We recovered a device from the conference room, she said. Daniel was attempting to remove it. Arthur leaned forward. The monitor beside him quickened, and Dr. Patel pointed at him without looking up from his tablet. Arthur sat back. Does it have audio? Lab is checking. Samuel says it connects to the backup room system. It does. Arthur said. Installed after the Midwestern contractors threatened litigation. It records when certain doors are locked and privacy mode is activated. Annie looked at him. You record your own family meetings? Arthur turned to her. Not constantly. Only in restricted rooms under certain settings. Grace raised an eyebrow. That sounded like a yes with better shoes. Arthur accepted that. Yes. Bennett continued. If the audio survived, it may give us the poisoning conspiracy. But I don't want everyone celebrating yet. Tech takes time, defense attorneys make noise, and evidence has to survive more than our hopes. Annie nodded. She was learning that hope, in legal rooms, had to stand behind procedure and wait its turn. Samuel appeared behind Bennett. There is more. Financial analysts located a transfer from a consulting account tied to Daniel to a shell account connected to Marcus Vale, the security supervisor. It matches the camera outage window. Arthur closed his eyes for a second. Marcus? He asked. Bennett said, already being picked up. Grace looked from one face to another. So, that proves Daniel paid to shut off the cameras. It strongly supports it, Bennett said. And Victor's phone links him to Daniel's assistant, not Daniel directly. But the assistant is now asking for a lawyer too, which usually means the morning is improving. Annie should have felt relieved. Part of her did. But another part kept waiting for Daniel to appear in a doorway, smiling, turning every fact into a doubt. What happens to me? She asked. Everyone looked at her, and she hated that too. Bennett answered first. You give one formal statement on record with your mother present if you want. You may be called later, but we'll try to limit how often you have to repeat the same trauma. You do not speak to press. You do not meet with Whitmore family members. You keep your phone on. Can I go to work? Grace said. Annie, I'm asking. Bennett's expression softened by half an inch. Not tonight. Soon. Maybe. But tonight, let us be cautious. Annie sought back. Arthur spoke quietly. I can cover lost wages. No, Annie said at once. I did not mean, I know what you meant. Still no. Arthur stopped, then nodded. All right. Grace looked at him. She isn't being rude. I know. She's trying not to feel owned. Arthur's face changed. I know that too. Annie looked at him then. He did know, or at least he was trying to. That did not erase the hallway, the threats, the rain, but it made the room less hard to breathe in. Samuel's voice came through the speaker. Arthur, there is one more matter. Daniel's attorney is requesting a private family discussion before any further cooperation. Arthur almost laughed. No, I assumed, Bennett said. Good. Because private family discussions are how people lose evidence and gain bruises. Grace murmured, Amen to that. The call ended with Bennett promising updates and Samuel returning to the search of the executive floor. Dr. Patel stepped closer to Arthur. Time. Arthur looked at Annie. Miss Carter, I had intended to meet you under different circumstances. So did I, she said. Actually, I didn't intend to meet you at all. The honesty startled him into a small smile. It vanished quickly. I will not ask you to forgive my family, he said. I will not ask you to trust mine. But I would like you to trust this much. Daniel will not be allowed to bury what he did. Annie looked at the tin box on the table. The tape was wrinkled, the letters still holding. My mother says justice comes late sometimes, she said. Grace reached for her hand. Arthur nodded. Then I hope we have finally made it late enough to arrive. That evening, the backup audio came through. It was damaged in places, full of static and room noise. But the voices were clear enough where it mattered. Daniel complaining about the revised will. Margaret warning him not to be careless. The clink of glass. Arthur saying the foundation would go forward. Daniel, lower but audible, speaking to someone near the sideboard. Handled the dosage. Then, later, after Arthur left the room, Daniel's voice again. By morning, he won't be signing anything. Detective Bennett listened to it twice before speaking. Samuel stood beside her, older in that moment than he had looked all day. Is it enough? He asked. Bennett removed the headphones. It's enough to knock on the door, she said. And this time, we don't knock politely. By sunrise, Daniel Whitmore's apartment no longer looked calm. He had left a half-packed leather bag on the bed, 2 drawers open, shirts pulled from hangers and dropped without care. His passport sat on the nightstand beside 3 phones, a watch, and a glass of water he had not touched. Margaret stood near the bedroom door in yesterday's clothes, her face drawn, her voice no longer polished. "You said the recorder was gone." Daniel zipped the bag too hard. "It was gone from my hand." "That is not the same thing." "No, Margaret, it is not." "Thank you for clarifying that, while police are turning over my office." She stepped into the room. "Don't speak to me like I did this alone." He looked up. That stopped her, but only for a second. "I was in the room," she said. "I heard arguments. I heard anger. I did not agree to murder." Daniel laughed once, short and ugly. "You agreed to inheritance." People like to pretend those are separate subjects until the body gets inconvenient. Margaret's hand rose, then fell. "Arthur was going to give away everything our father built. Arthur built most of it. He was going to give it to strangers." Daniel shoved a stack of cash into the bag. "Scholarships, clinics, poor children with good essays. Yes, tragic." Margaret stared at him. "You sound like a monster." "No," he said, closing the bag. "I sound like the only person in this family willing to say that money has owners." His phone rang. He snatched it up, saw the number, and answered. His attorney spoke for less than 30 seconds. Daniel did not interrupt. Margaret watched his face lose color in small stages. When he ended the call, he put the phone down carefully. "What?" she asked. The audio survived. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed as if her knees had stopped being hers. "How much?" "Enough." Outside, in the hallway, there was a knock. Not loud, not hurried. 3 firm strikes. Daniel and Margaret looked at each other. Another knock came, followed by Detective Bennett's voice. "Daniel Whitmore, Chicago Police Department." "Open the door." Daniel moved toward the side table. Margaret grabbed his arm. "Don't be stupid." He pulled away. "I'm getting my phone. You have 3 phones in this room." Bennett's voice came again. "We have a warrant. This door is not going to win." Daniel stood still, breathing through his nose, the bag at his feet. In that moment, he did not look like a nephew, an executive, or a man who had grown up hearing his last name open every door. He looked like someone discovering that locks worked both ways. He opened the door. Bennett stood there with 2 officers and a folded warrant in her hand. Samuel Reed was not with them. Arthur was not with them. Daniel had expected one of them, maybe both, as if his downfall required an audience he could impress. Bennett did not give him that. "Daniel Whitmore," she said. "You're under arrest for solicitation, witness intimidation, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Other charges may follow." Margaret made a sound behind him. Daniel looked at Bennett. "This is a mistake." "It usually is. My attorney is on the way. He can meet you downtown." One officer turned Daniel gently but firmly toward the wall. When the cuffs clicked around his wrists, his face tightened, not from pain but humiliation. He looked back once at Margaret. "Say nothing," he told her. Bennett looked at Margaret. "That's the first useful advice he's given today." Margaret sat very still. As Daniel was taken down the hallway, a neighbor opened a door 3 inches, then another. People who had never once seen Daniel carry his own groceries now watched him walk past in handcuffs. He kept his head straight, but the red had risen up his neck. In the elevator, he finally spoke. "You think Arthur will thank you?" Bennett looked ahead. "I don't arrest people for gratitude. He'll use you like everyone else. Maybe. But you used poison. So today you're more interesting." Daniel leaned closer. "That girl is nothing. You understand that? Nothing. A scared little waitress who got lucky in an alley." Bennett turned then, slowly. "No. She's the reason your uncle is alive to testify. That makes her very much something." The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Cameras were already outside. Local reporters gathered behind the glass, tipped off by police activity around a Whitmore residence. Bennett's jaw tightened. She had not wanted Annie's name in this storm. Not yet. Daniel saw the reporters and straightened as much as the cuffs allowed. Even in disgrace, instinct told him to perform. Bennett leaned closer before the officers moved him forward. "One more thing," she said. "If you or anyone connected to you mentions Annie Carter's name to the press, I will make sure every bail argument includes witness tampering concerns in language even your expensive friends can understand." Daniel's smile did not survive that. At the hospital, Arthur watched the arrest on television without sound. The news helicopter angle was poor, but he knew Daniel's coat, knew the set of his shoulders, knew the face he wore when anger had to pretend it was dignity. Samuel stood beside the bed with the remote in his hand. Dr. Patel had allowed the television only after making Arthur promise not to shout, stand, or attempt to hold a press conference from the cardiac floor. Arthur had agreed to the first two. The third was still under negotiation. "He is arrested," Samuel said. "Yes." "You do not sound relieved." Arthur watched Daniel disappear into the back of a police car. "I keep thinking of his father." Samuel lowered the remote. "Your brother? He asked me to look after him before he died. I thought I did. Schools, work, board access, money. You gave him doors," Samuel said. "He chose which rooms to enter." Arthur turned away from the screen. "That sounds like something decent people say when they want grief to fit in a drawer. It rarely does." Dr. Patel entered before Arthur could answer. "I heard you were behaving." "That was exaggerated." The doctor checked the monitor. "Your numbers are better." "Good. I want to leave." "No." Arthur looked at Samuel. He enjoys that word. Dr. Patel did not look up. "I enjoy patients who survive long enough to complain about me." Samuel's phone buzzed. He read the message and looked at Arthur. "What is it?" Arthur asked. "Detective Bennett says Daniel is in custody. Victor Hale's statement is on record. Ray Collins is cooperating. Marcus Vale was picked up at his sister's house. Margaret has not been charged yet, but she is represented." Arthur nodded. "And Annie?" Samuel read further. "At home with her mother. Bennett sent a patrol unit past the building. Mabel Dawson is bringing dinner." Arthur closed his eyes. Samuel waited. "I want to see her," Arthur said. "You are not leaving." "No. Bring her here." Samuel did not answer right away. Arthur opened his eyes. "What?" "You should ask, not summon." The correction landed, and Arthur let it. Before the alley, he might have argued. Now he heard the difference. "You're right," he said. "Please ask Miss Carter if she would be willing to see me. Here, or wherever she chooses. No press, no family, no obligation." Samuel nodded. "That I can do." Across town, Annie sat at the kitchen table while Mabel unpacked meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a peach cobbler still warm enough to fog the plastic lid. Grace looked at the food. "Mabel, this could feed 6 people. Then eat like 6 people. Stress burns calories." Annie was not hungry, but the smell pulled at something human in her. The last 2 days had been sirens, police rooms, wet pavement, and fear. Meatloaf felt like a hand on the shoulder. Mr. Peterson had sent rolls from the bakery. Mr. Alvarez from the corner store had sent oranges and a note that read, "Keep your head up, Mija." Though Annie was not Latina and he knew it, that was how he wrote to every young person he worried about. Grace set plates on the table. "This whole neighborhood knows?" Mabel gave her a look. "Not the details. Enough. Enough for what?" "Enough to know nobody in this building opens the front door for strangers tonight." Annie looked up. "You told them?" "I informed the relevant elders." Grace almost smiled. "Relevant elders?" "Every building has a government. You know that." For the first time in days, Annie laughed without it breaking. Then Samuel called. Grace answered, put it on speaker, and kept serving food. "Mrs. Carter," Samuel said, "Daniel Whitmore has been arrested." Annie's fork stopped halfway to the plate. Grace closed her eyes. Mabel made the sign of the cross, though she was not consistent about church. Samuel continued. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to ask, not tell, whether Miss Carter would be willing to meet with him. No press, no family, no attorneys, unless you want one present. He said there is no obligation." Grace looked at Annie. Annie looked down at the table, at the meatloaf, at the rolls, at the small army of ordinary care surrounding her. "Is he still in the hospital?" she asked. "Yes." "Is he supposed to be?" Samuel paused. "More than he wishes to be," Mabel muttered. "Men." Annie looked at Grace. "What do you think?" "I think you don't owe him a visit. I also think you may have things you want to say." "I don't know what to say." "Then start with that." Annie took the phone off speaker and held it to her ear. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes, Miss Carter. I'll come, but my mother comes with me." "Of course. And no cameras?" "None." And if he tries to give me a check, I'm leaving. On the other end, Samuel was quiet for a second. Then Annie heard the faintest breath of amusement. I will warn him that generosity, if mishandled, may become a medical risk. Annie almost smiled. Thank you. That evening, Samuel drove Annie and Grace to the hospital. The city had cleared after rain, and the streets reflected the last light. Annie wore her best sweater. The dark green one Grace said made her look grown, though Annie did not feel grown. Grace wore a navy dress, and the same firm expression she used at parent-teacher conferences years ago. At the hospital entrance, no reporters waited. Samuel had seen to that. They went up through a side elevator, past 2 security officers, and into a quiet hallway where the floor smelled of flowers someone had sent and coffee someone had forgotten. Arthur's door was partly open. Samuel knocked once. Mr. Whitmore. Miss Carter and Mrs. Carter. Arthur tried to stand. Dr. Patel, seated in the corner with a chart, said, "Do it, and I sedate you emotionally." Arthur stayed seated. Annie stepped inside. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The last time she had seen Arthur under hospital lights, he had been unconscious and surrounded by people who looked at her like dirt. Now he sat upright, thinner, tired, a blanket over his legs, eyes fixed on her with a kind of humility that seemed to cost him effort. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Whitmore." Grace stood beside her daughter, not behind her. Arthur turned to Grace first. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming." Grace nodded. "We came to listen." Arthur accepted the boundary. He looked back at Annie. "I have said I am sorry through Samuel. I wanted to say it to your face. I am sorry for what my family did in that hallway. I am sorry for what Daniel did after. I am sorry that saving my life brought danger to yours." Annie's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I didn't save you because you were Arthur Whitmore. I know. I didn't know who you were. I know. I just didn't want you to die alone in the rain." Arthur looked down at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "That may be the most valuable thing anyone has ever done for me." Annie did not know what to do with that. Grace did. "Then value it correctly." Arthur looked at her. "I intend to." Annie sat in the chair Samuel brought. But she did not relax. "What happens now? Daniel will face what the law can prove. I will give Detective Bennett everything she needs. The estate changes will go forward. The foundation will go forward." "That's good," Annie said, though she was not sure why he was telling her. Arthur noticed. "I'm telling you because the reason he tried to kill me was not only money. It was money he believed should never reach people like you." Annie looked up. Arthur held her gaze. "He was wrong before he knew your name." Grace's eyes softened, but only a little. Arthur continued, carefully now. "I will not offer you anything tonight. Samuel has warned me, and he was right. You deserve safety before gratitude, truth before gifts. But when this is done, I would like permission to honor what you did in a way that does not make you feel bought." Annie looked at him for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she said. Arthur nodded. "That is more than I have earned." Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "And on that surprisingly healthy note, this patient needs rest." Arthur sighed. "He says that when he is losing an argument." "No," Dr. Patel said. "I say it because your heart is attached to you, and I've grown invested." Annie smiled before she could stop herself. Arthur saw it, and for the first time since waking, something in the room felt less like damage. As Annie and Grace stood to leave, Arthur spoke again. "Miss Carter." She turned. "In the alley, you told me to open my eyes. I was trying to keep you awake. You did more than that." Annie did not answer. She was afraid if she did, she might cry. Arthur's voice was quiet. "I am awake now," he said. Annie nodded once. Outside the room, as Samuel walked them back to the elevator, Grace took Annie's hand. Neither of them spoke until the doors opened. Inside the elevator, Annie leaned against the wall and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since the alley. Grace looked at her. "You all right?" "No," Annie said. Then, after a moment, she added, "But maybe I'm getting there." The next morning, Annie woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of her mother talking in the kitchen. Not to herself. Not to the television. To someone on the phone. Annie lay still for a moment, listening through the thin bedroom wall. "No, ma'am," Grace said. "My daughter is not giving interviews. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not because you ask nicely. You have a blessed morning. A pause. Then the firm click of the phone being placed back in its cradle. Annie pulled the blanket over her face. The story had gotten out. Not all of it, not the parts that mattered most, but enough. By breakfast, local news stations were reporting that Daniel Whitmore had been arrested in connection with the attempted murder of his uncle, billionaire Arthur Whitmore. They mentioned a young woman who had called 911 after finding Arthur in an alley. Some said, a waitress. Some said, an unidentified teenager. One online post used a blurry still from the diner security camera, and though Annie's face was not clear, it was clear enough for people who knew her to know. Grace turned the television off before Annie entered the kitchen. I wasn't watching, Grace said. Annie looked at the dark screen. You turned it off fast for somebody who wasn't watching. I was watching the weather. Was the weather handcuffed? Grace gave her a look, then softened. Coffee? Annie sat. Please. On the table was her tin box, a stack of damp papers now dried and flattened under books, and a plate of toast cut diagonally, because Grace still did that when she was worried. Annie touched the lid of the tin. The tape had wrinkled after the rain, but the words college fund still held on. They called again? Annie asked. 2 reporters. One woman said she wanted to tell your side. My side? Folks love your side once it makes their ratings look good. Annie took the coffee. What did you say? I said no. Then I said it again in church language. Despite herself, Annie smiled. A knock came at the door. Both women stopped. Then Mabel's voice called from the hallway. It's me, and I brought biscuits. Don't make me eat them out here. Grace opened the door. Mabel came in with a paper bag, her cheeks pink from the cold, and Mr. Peterson behind her holding a small cardboard tray of coffee cups. I was passing by, Mr. Peterson said. Mabel snorted. He was not. I was passing by after she told me to come. Grace stepped aside. You all didn't have to. Mabel set the biscuits down. We know. Mr. Peterson placed 1 coffee in front of Annie. Black with 2 sugars? You still drink it that way? Annie stared at the cup. You remembered? I delivered mail for 32 years. Remembering things is the only reason people didn't get their light bills mixed up with birthday cards. They gathered around the kitchen table without ceremony. It was too crowded, but nobody complained. Mabel buttered biscuits. Grace poured coffee. Mr. Peterson told Annie that 3 women on the 2nd floor had already decided to take turns watching the front door, whether anyone asked them to or not. We don't need a patrol, Annie said. Mabel looked at her. Good. Then we'll call it sitting near windows. Grace nodded. That sounds less official. Annie looked from one older face to another and felt something loosen in her chest. For days, danger had made her feel singled out. Now care was doing the same thing, but gentler. Her phone buzzed. Samuel Reed. Grace saw the name. Answer. Annie did. Hello? Good morning, Miss Carter. I hope I'm not calling too early. You're not. I wanted to inform you before you saw it elsewhere. Daniel Whitmore will be arraigned this afternoon. His attorney will likely argue that the evidence is circumstantial, that Mr. Whitmore is confused due to his medical condition, and that hired men acted without instruction. Annie held the cup tighter. Can they make people believe that? They can try, Mabel muttered. Trying is free. Winning costs extra. Samuel paused, having heard her. Mrs. Dawson is not wrong. Annie put the call on speaker. Samuel continued. Detective Bennett believes the evidence is strong, especially with the audio and Victor Hale's statement. But the process will take time. Mr. Whitmore wants you to know your name will be protected where possible. Where possible, Grace repeated. Yes, ma'am, Samuel said. I won't lie to you. Some details may come out. Annie looked at the dark television. They already are. I'm sorry. I know. There is something else, Samuel said. Mr. Whitmore is asking whether you and Mrs. Carter would be willing to attend a private meeting at his office after the arraignment. Detective Bennett will be present. It concerns the foundation documents and a formal statement he intends to make. Grace frowned. Why does Annie need to be there? She does not need to be. He wants her to hear what he plans before the public does. Annie glanced at her mother. Mabel pointed a butter knife at the phone. No cameras? No cameras, Samuel said. Lawyers? One foundation attorney, Detective Bennett. Myself. Mr. Whitmore. No family. Grace looked at Annie. Your choice. Annie thought of Arthur in the hospital bed saying he would not offer anything yet. She thought of Daniel's voice through other people's threats. She thought of the word foundation, the reason all of this had started before she ever stepped into the alley. I'll go, she said, but if it turns into people talking over me, I'm leaving. Samuel's answer came without hesitation. Understood. That afternoon, Arthur Whitmore watched Daniel's arraignment from a conference room at Whitmore Capital. Not from the hospital. Dr. Patel had allowed his discharge under conditions so strict, Samuel printed them and placed a copy in Arthur's coat pocket, as if the paper itself could keep him obedient. Arthur looked better in his own clothes, but not well. His face still had a gray undertone. He moved carefully. He hated that everyone noticed. On the screen, Daniel stood beside his attorney in county court, no longer polished enough to appear untouchable, still polished enough to try. The charges were read. The attorney spoke of confusion, family conflict, an unstable medical event, unreliable hired criminals attempting to reduce their own exposure. Arthur listened without expression. When the prosecutor mentioned witness intimidation involving an 18-year-old who had rendered aid to the victim, Annie looked down at her hands. Grace, seated beside her, whispered, "Breathe." Annie did. Bail was set high, with strict no-contact orders. Daniel was not released that afternoon. Mabel would have called that something. Bennett called it a start. When the screen went dark, the room stayed quiet. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through the executive floor pretending not to know. History had cracked open in the room beside them. Arthur turned from the screen. "Miss Carter. Mrs. Carter. Thank you for coming." Annie sat across from him in a conference chair that cost more than their kitchen table. She had worn her green sweater again. Grace wore her navy dress. Samuel stood near the door. Detective Bennett leaned against the wall with a paper cup of coffee, looking like she trusted furniture only in theory. Arthur placed a folder on the table but did not push it toward Annie. "I want to explain something before anything becomes public," he said. "Before the attack, I was changing my estate plan. The Whitmore Foundation was going to expand scholarships and healthcare grants. Daniel believed that money belonged to him and others in my family." Grace said, "And he tried to kill you for it." "Yes." Annie watched him answer without flinching. Arthur opened the folder. "After what happened, I reviewed the foundation again. Not because guilt makes a good architect. It does not. But because the weakness Daniel tried to exploit was already there. Too much of my wealth depended on my mood, my signature, my survival. That was arrogance." The foundation attorney, a woman named Caroline Price, sat forward. "Mr. Whitmore is placing the education and community health portion into an independent structure. It cannot be reversed by family pressure." Bennett lifted her cup. "In plain English?" Caroline gave a small smile. "The money goes where he says it goes, even if relatives complain loudly." Mabel was not there, but Annie could hear her approving. Arthur looked at Annie. "The first program will support students pursuing nursing, emergency medicine, elder care, and community health." Annie's throat tightened before she understood why. "Because of me? Because of what you reminded me," he said. "That care is often given by people who receive the least protection." Grace's eyes moved to Arthur's face, searching for performance. Annie did the same. Arthur did not reach for applause. He did not smile like a man unveiling generosity. He looked tired, and that helped. Tired men had less room for theater. Annie asked, "Is this the part where you put my name in a speech?" "No," Arthur said. "Not unless you want that, and I assume you do not." "I don't. Then your name stays out of it." Samuel's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked at Bennett. She stepped over, read the screen, and her expression changed. Arthur noticed. "What now?" Bennett set her coffee down. "Daniel's attorney just filed an emergency motion claiming you are mentally compromised and being manipulated by staff, police, and an unidentified young woman seeking financial benefit." Grace's hand came down on the table. "There it is." Annie felt the room tilt, but this time not from fear alone. Anger rose with it. Arthur's face went cold. "He is still trying to use her." "Yes," Bennett said, "and he's doing it through court papers now." Caroline looked unsettled. "We can respond legally." Arthur stood too quickly. His hand went to the table. Samuel moved, but Arthur steadied himself. "No," Arthur said. "We respond truthfully. Dr. Patel would have shouted if he had been there." Samuel looked ready to do it in his place. Arthur turned to Annie. "I will not use your name. I will not expose you. But I will not allow Daniel to suggest that you saved me for money." Annie stood too. Her knees were not steady, but her voice was. "I didn't ask for his money," she said. "I asked him to breathe." No one spoke. Bennett looked at her with something close to pride. Grace closed her eyes for 1 second, as if holding those words somewhere safe. Samuel's face softened. Arthur looked as though the sentence had struck him in the chest more deeply than the heart attack. Caroline reached slowly for her pen. "With your permission, Miss Carter, that sentence does not need your name to matter." Annie looked at Grace. Grace nodded once. "Your words, your choice." Annie sat back down, still shaking. "Use it. But not my name." Arthur lowered himself into his chair. "Then that will be the statement." Within an hour, Arthur Whitmore released a brief public response through his attorney in the foundation office. It did not name Annie. It did not mention race. It did not turn her pain into decoration. It said only that the person who found him had acted with courage, that any suggestion of financial motive was false, and that, in her own words, she had not asked for his money, she had asked him to breathe. By evening, the line was everywhere. People repeated it on local news. Nurses shared it. Older women in church groups posted it beside praying hands. Men who had never thought much about who stopped in the rain began talking about dignity as if they had just remembered the word. At home that night, Annie sat beside Grace on the sofa and watched one anchor read the statement aloud. Not her name, not her face, just the truth. Grace reached over and squeezed her hand. "How do you feel?" Annie watched the screen go to a photo of Arthur's office building, then to the courthouse where Daniel's attorney had tried to make her into something small. "I don't know," she said. "That's allowed." After a while, Annie picked up her scholarship essay from the coffee table. The prompt still asked about a challenge she had overcome. This time, she wrote one sentence. "I learned that doing the right thing does not always feel like courage at first. Sometimes it feels like fear, rain, and staying anyway." She looked at it for a long time. Then she kept writing. "The lesson of this story is that true kindness does not ask about race, money, or social status before helping someone in need." Annie had every reason to walk away, yet she chose to save a stranger's life in the rain. Her courage reminds us that justice may come slowly, but the truth has a way of rising when good people refuse to stay silent. The story also teaches that power without compassion can become dangerous, while one honest act from an ordinary person can open the eyes of those who have forgotten what humanity means. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real, and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.